steel, firearms, and the Industrialists crossing into another world. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 201 Year End. Advent is a significant festival for people around the world. In ancient times, people regarded this day as the dividing line between the old and new year. Later, with the improvement of calendars, Advent lost this function in the old calendar, and the first day of each year in the new calendar was postponed to about a week after Advent. However, Advent remains the most important day, not only because of strong traditional factors, but also because it has a religious significance. Legend has it that this day is the day when Archangel Windsor led 500 archangels to Earth. At that time, humans were still at the level of slash-and-burn agriculture and knotted ropes for record-keeping. Their tools were made of polished stone, and their clothes were made of animal skins and plant leaves. At that time, many alien races existed on the continent, threatening the weak human race. The angels taught humans all kinds of amazing technologies, such as planting techniques, domestication of animals and plants, metal smelting, and also brought incredible writing, ultimately helping human society emerge from the age of ignorance. With these powerful technologies, humanity gradually established its dominance on the continent, forcing orcs to flee to the grasslands, dwarves to retreat to the mountains, and elves to hide in the forests. Many other races simply vanished from the annals of history, leaving no trace. Humans eventually occupied the most habitable plains of the continent, multiplying and thriving to this day. However, as time passed and through infrequent but continuous exchanges between races, human technology gradually spread to other races. This convergence in technological levels also narrowed the gap in military strength, fueling the ambitions of other races to return to habitable lands. Human armies could no longer completely overwhelm their opponents, and racial conflict intensified once again. The last complete suppression of other races occurred during the unification of the ancient Gabella Empire. The unified human empire launched several large-scale expeditions, and with its still superior weaponry and advanced military system, it once again forced the other races to submit, re-establishing human civilization's absolute hegemony on the continent. However, the empire ultimately collapsed, and the fragmented human kingdoms fought amongst themselves. Logically, this should have been a golden opportunity for the alien races to turn the tide. Fortunately, the empire's influence remained, and races like dwarves and elves, due to their small populations, seemed to have abandoned their ambitions to dominate the continent. Only the orcs, inhabiting the northern grasslands, remained. They had a high fertility rate and a large population, but the fragile ecosystem of the grasslands couldn't support such a large influx. The pressure to survive, coupled with their resentment at being repeatedly suppressed throughout history, kept them eyeing the fertile lands of the south. The orcs had already launched several large-scale invasions, but they abandoned their previous strategy of conquering and occupying territory, instead opting for a quick raiding approach. They targeted weakly defended settlements, using their cavalry advantage to move swiftly and avoid protracted warfare with the human armies. The fragmented nations couldn't support a large cavalry force like the ancient Gabella Empire, and their weakening royal power and deteriorating logistics couldn't sustain a decent expedition. This left humanity extremely passive in the face of orc raids. Orc raids became a major headache for the rulers of the northern kingdoms. In the main hall of the Lord's Mansion in Lacahurt, key military and political officials of Alder gathered, including Naval Commander Austin and Shipyard Supervisor Reuben, who usually resided in Fland Harbor. With Advent approaching and the old year drawing to a close, Paul decided to summon his men to Lacahurt to summarize the year's gains and losses and look ahead to future development. Before the Lord arrived, the group discussed the many major events of the year. News from the east suggests that many villages and towns have been plundered by orcs since winter began. Alice, the rebellion in the south prevents the royal family from allocating much manpower to support the northeast. We're much luckier here. We have continuous primeval forests and mountains to the north. The kingdom of Alder has mountain ranges to the north and east as natural barriers, but the northeast is unique in that it lies between two mountain ranges, containing a small plain that forms the northeast corridor connecting Alder to the northern grasslands. Every winter, orcs from the grasslands would use this corridor to raid various parts of the northeast, especially during the White Disaster, because the northeastern corridor is far from the kingdom's heartland. The small-scale orc raids are not as threatening as the barbarian rebellions in the eastern highlands. Furthermore, the rebellions in the south have prevented the High Command from allocating much manpower, so this year only symbolic support has been provided to the northeast. This year has truly been a turbulent one for the Kingdom of Alder. While others were rejoicing over Alder's position, only Chief of Staff Schroeder and Joyce, now commander of the 3rd Battalion, wore worried expressions. Both had served in the Northeastern Army and personally participated in the war against the orcs. They had an emotional attachment to that land, and naturally, they were not happy to hear news of the orcs' incursions and raids. Schroeder, in particular, had spent most of his military career there. Seeing everyone's indifferent attitude, Joyce couldn't help but say, "Gentlemen, without lips, the tongue will feel the cold. If the orcs seize the opportunity when the kingdom is weak and gather their forces to occupy the northeastern territories, our next target will probably be us." Bryce made a fist gesture in midair, "Then we'll blast them back with cannons." Joyce shrugged. These people had never witnessed the ferocity of the orcs. They were nothing like the pirates and peasant soldiers conscripted by the lords they had dealt with before. But Joyce had. Those terrifying creatures, raised in harsh environments from childhood, were practically born for war. Even ordinary orcs were nearly 2 meters tall, with strong, powerful limbs, a volatile temperament, and the ability to endure hunger. Their long-term nomadic lifestyle made them natural cavalry, easily assembling a powerful mobile force. Fortunately, their discipline was extremely poor. They lacked strategy, formation, and unit coordination, often simply charging forward with whatever weapons they were comfortable with, which gave the human army the opportunity to win. As the hall buzzed with discussion, Paul Gleman entered, accompanied by his chief secretary, Bernard, and the female advisor, Miss Diaz. Everyone rose to greet their lord. "Greetings, everyone. Please be seated." Paul and his 2 companions sat down, and the meeting officially began. Chapter 202 Year-End 2. My lord, this year we have consolidated a total of 13,000 hectares of arable land, including 10,000 hectares in Arda and 3,000 hectares in Berden. Next year, we will accelerate the process and plan to continue consolidating the remaining 60,000 hectares in these 2 areas within 2 to 3 years. In the castle hall, Minister of Agriculture Hansel was reporting on his work. The so-called consolidation of arable land involved piecing together scattered small plots of land belonging to gentry and landowners in various regions through exchange, transfer, and other methods, into large arable land, which would then be managed by only one entity. Alternatively, it involved connecting the small plots of land held by individual farmers, with newly established farmers' associations providing intensive management and guidance, such as raising funds from households to carry out public affairs. By establishing large farms in this way, landowners would be willing to spend money on large-scale irrigation projects, road and bridge construction on their own vast tracts of land, without worrying about being ripped off and their neighbors benefiting from their large expenditures. So slow, Paul slammed his hand on the table. He thought it would be finished in 6 months, but it turned out to take several years. Clearly, the Lord was quite dissatisfied with the Ministry of Agriculture's progress. "Oh, Lord Gleman, please let me explain." Hansel began to complain to Paul with a bewildered expression. "This work is tough. Both landlords and peasants are terrified of losing out in the land exchange, yet they're all focused on how to gain an advantage. Landlords scheme against each other, peasants fight, and even entire villages engage in large-scale armed conflicts. These are things we frequently encounter. Moreover, we're short-handed. We can only conduct the land exchange village by village. Hopefully, we can be assigned more officials next year." Paul retorted indignantly, "How can these people be so short-sighted? It's just a few meters of land, a little more or less. What's the big deal? Haha, my lord, let alone a few square meters, even a few inches less is like a death sentence to them. And the quality of farmland varies greatly from place to place, which makes measurement extremely difficult. Alright, anyway, you all keep up the good work and try to finish it by next year." Hansel pulled out a handkerchief to wipe his sweat. "Well, we will do our best." Paul then asked, "How is the promotion of the new farming techniques going?" "It's going very smoothly. Farmers' associations in various places have introduced crop rotation to villages and towns, and the landowners have responded that they will start testing it next year. But the individual farmers are not so enthusiastic. After all, they have little land and always need to grow some edible crops to produce enough food for their families. We don't need to force these small farmers. Once grain production increases and they have the money to buy food from the market, they will naturally have the courage to try it. Yes, my lord, Hansel continued to report. Due to the promotion of harvesters, everyone has surplus manpower to cultivate new farmland. Next year, we estimate that the cultivated land area will increase by about 1/6, including Arda and Berden. Paul nodded in satisfaction. That's good. But the new farmland must also follow the large-scale farm model. Of course, my lord, we will monitor it strictly. After reporting on the agricultural matters he was most concerned about, Paul then listened to reports on commerce, finance, immigration, and military affairs. Overall, he was satisfied with the situation. Since the introduction of a series of measures to support commerce, a total of 23 factories of various kinds had been built in Arda and Berden, producing canned goods, paper, porcelain, and salt. Now, goods from both places had begun to be sold in the northwestern territories, and even a small amount had been sold near Jingaiao. Paul believed that once the southward shipping route was fully opened, trade would grow even more rapidly, and without layers of tariffs, the profits would be even greater. Higher profits would attract more merchants to invest in building factories. Thanks to the establishment of various private factories and the sale of various new products, the government's tax revenue reached 23,000 silver coins this year, while the Gleman family's business income reached 25,000 silver coins, totaling nearly 50,000 silver coins. After deducting various expenses, there was still a surplus of 10,000 silver coins. Spend it all. Spend it all. Next year, I hope the surplus will not exceed 2,000 silver coins. Paul waved his hand, saying words that left everyone in the government speechless. Only when money circulates can it be considered wealth, otherwise, it's just a pile of metal lying around collecting dust. I suddenly had an idea. Why don't we invest more money in education next year? The territory is so short of talent, investing in education is always a good thing. This idea was met with enthusiastic support, especially from the female advisor, Miss Diaz, who was particularly concerned about the affairs of the Weiss Academy. Regarding immigration, the Council of State has received 1,563 refugees so far. Most of these are able-bodied men and women. Those who are too old or too young generally cannot make it to the Northwest Bay. Most of them have been resettled in various newly opened factories. More refugees will arrive tomorrow, Hansel told everyone. The news of the Earl of Arda recruiting immigrants has spread far and wide, and refugees will automatically flock to us. Besides the rebellious areas in the south, those who have been plundered by orcs in the northeast will also come here. After the Council of State finished their reports, the military, led by Schroeder, began to report on military matters. The size of the army hadn't increased much, but there had been significant progress in weaponry and equipment. On the army side, with the successful development of the flintlock musket, small batch production had begun, and the 1st Army Battalion had been tasked with equipment testing. The Navy, however, was the major contributor to military spending. This year, the Navy received 3 new sailing warships, and according to Austin's 666 plan, another 3 were under construction. However, the naval commander was still dissatisfied with this batch of ships. In order to equip them as quickly as possible, much of the timber had not been properly dried, which meant that these sailing warships were destined to have a short lifespan. Therefore, he proposed that the construction of the next batch of warships must follow the proper procedures, allowing the timber to be fully dried to create a batch of qualified warships. Austin, my next plan is to develop civilian merchant ships, to help merchants travel south to do business. But you know, the shipyard's capacity is limited. Paul's words left the naval commander extremely frustrated. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 203 Year End 3. While Austin was reporting on naval matters, Paul inquired about the Southern. I just received a letter from them, delivered by an adventurer at breakneck speed. Judging from this, They should be in the middle of the kingdom's coastline. Will they be back before Advent Day? Austin shook his head. Not optimistic. They might not even make it in time for New Year's. Why so slow? They're sailing north against the wind, and the letter mentioned 2 more women. Naturally, they can't be as carefree as they were on the way there. Frequent docking is necessary to replenish fresh water and such. Oh, I forgot about that. Also, according to the letter, Lady Laddie's identity has been exposed. Haha, Quake will surely be shocked. Is there anything else to report regarding the military? Their conversation puzzled everyone. Many knew the green-haired female advisor had gone with the Southern to pick up her family, but what did exposed mean? Chief of Staff Schroeder spoke up. Lord Gleman, I have some suggestions regarding officer training. Paul gestured for him to continue. Previously, officer training at the military academy used a crash course approach, cramming them with a hodgepodge of knowledge. I suggest that starting next year, officer training should be more formalized and systematic. Very good, I agree. Given that we are a newly formed force and urgently need many junior officers, we can temporarily implement a 1-year system. Later, when the need is less urgent, we can change it to 3 or 4 years. How will military academy cadets be recruited, and what will happen to them after graduation? We can directly recruit literate young people from the civilian population who are determined to join the military, or we can select soldiers with good performance or merit from the army to study at the military academy. After graduation, cadets will be awarded the rank of sergeant or lieutenant based on their grades and will serve as platoon officers, starting from the lowest ranks. Paul agreed to Schroeder's suggestion. Okay, then I'll trouble you to draft a charter. Yes, sir. Sir Schroeder, don't forget about our navy. Of course, we won't favor one over the other. Civilian education should also be strengthened. A silvery voice rang out. It was the female advisor, Miss Diaz. So far, the teaching methods at Weiss Academy have been quite rudimentary. I hope Lord Gleman can pay more attention to this. Do you have any good suggestions? Eileen thought for a moment and said, I hope we can follow the model of those church schools, dividing the children into different grades according to their age at enrollment, and adopting a class system, instead of cramming them into one classroom in a chaotic manner. Paul asked, how many grades should there be? I suggest a 5-year system, divided into 5 grades. In addition, the curriculum needs to be divided. At least the 7 liberal arts must be included. The so-called 7 liberal arts refer to the 7 subjects of logic, grammar, rhetoric, mathematics, geometry, astronomy, and music, which are generally taught in schools established by churches. All right, Paul said. Besides literacy, we'll retain grammar, mathematics, and geometry from the 7 liberal arts. We'll also reduce the 5 grades to 4, so children can start school when they turn 6, he added. However, literacy education for the whole society must continue. We'll also set up special classes for older students, and continue running night schools for non-working citizens. Eileen was very dissatisfied. Why cut so many courses and reduce the number of grades? Paul helplessly shrugged. Miss Diaz, there's a rather harsh reality. We don't have enough teachers. If you can hire enough teachers for me, I'd be happy to offer these courses. Just as Paul finished speaking, a voice that Eileen absolutely hated added, besides, what the Lord cut out is completely useless for commoners. They only need to know how to read and count. It was Hansel Abbott. Eileen didn't even want to acknowledge him. His attitude towards refugees was still so terrible, and Count Gleman had only reminded him once at that meeting and that was it. She had approached Paul privately many times, only to be brushed off each time, which infuriated her. As for why I want to reduce the grade level, I don't want the children to be as carefree as they are in church schools. I want to hear the constant sound of reading coming from Weiss Academy all day long. Paul was eager to inflict the same suffering he had in his previous life on these poor flowers of this world, but there was another important reason. Children over 10 could be sent to factories as apprentices. Ah, right. To prevent a large number of unqualified graduates, I propose a system of easy entry but strict exit. There will be year-end exams, and those who fail will have to repeat the year. There will also be a graduation exam, and those who pass will receive a certificate, proof that their academic performance at our school is satisfactory. Those who fail will not receive a graduation certificate unless they repeat the year and pass the graduation exam. I understand, Your Excellency. Eileen nodded, jotting down notes on the paper in front of her with a quill pen. Earl Gleeman's later suggestions were indeed quite good. What about the expenses? Chief Steward Ford asked. Textbooks and paper cost money. My idea is, Adult education students should pay for their own books, while education for minors should be shared equally by parents and the Ministry of Education. As for teachers' salaries, the Ministry of Education can handle that. In short, teachers' salaries cannot be lower than those of our administrative staff, sir. This will be a huge expense. Next year, I guarantee the finances will be more abundant, and once we build more printing presses and establish a printing plant, the cost of textbooks will be greatly reduced. Let's try it for a year first, and if it doesn't work, we can adjust it. Eileen asked Paul, Earl, isn't it enough to only establish a school in Lakeside Town? One West Academy is far too few for the two Earls of Alda and Barden. You're right. In that case, we'll establish a school in every settlement that reaches the town level, and enroll students from the surrounding villages. When we have more money, we'll build a school in every village, but I estimate that's a bit far off. Paul replied that in his plan, more schools would definitely be built, and investing in education would generally not be a loss, especially in an era when people were highly dependent on their lords. Chapter 204 Year-End 4. Elon Gardner, who had been silent all along, said, Buchwai already has a church school. Perhaps we could cooperate with them to expand that school. Oh, forget it, Elon. Paul waved his hands repeatedly. I've heard that many clergy have a particular fondness for young boys. I don't want more children going there. Everyone burst into laughter, except for the female advisor, who blushed. Paul clenched his fist in midair. We must establish an education system completely under the control of the state council. He suddenly shifted his gaze, scrutinizing the female advisor. Eileen's heart pounded under his gaze. Earl Gremon was being incredibly rude in front of so many people. The female advisor blushed slightly and asked impatiently, Is there something you need, Your Excellency? Miss Diaz, I wonder if you would consider, what? The position of Director of Education in the State Council is currently vacant. Previously, this area wasn't well organized, so there wasn't much to do. However, if we're going to establish so many schools, the workload will be immense in the future. That's true. So, would you consider taking on the position of Director of Education? Eileen was stunned, looking at Paul, unsure what to say. Paul waited quietly for her reply, but before the female advisor could speak, someone in the hall voiced their objection. Ahem. Lord Gleman, this seems contrary to tradition. How can a woman hold a public office? Oh, I'm not doubting Miss Diaz's scholarship. After all, she's a genuine scholar, but a woman. In short, this is contrary to tradition. The speaker was Baron Hansel Abbott, who clearly disapproved of Paul's idea of appointing a female official, one of equal rank. But in our administrative system, Miss Diaz and Miss Laddie seem to be the two most learned people. Learning doesn't necessarily mean being suitable for administrative work. Your Excellency, some scholars are so engrossed in their research that they lack even basic social skills. How can they handle the work at all levels of the administrative system? But I remember that Her Highness the First Princess is a heroine who is proficient in both military and political affairs. Upon hearing the mention of the kingdom's first Princess Catherine, the Miss Diaz, who was still in a daze, trembled slightly. Oh. Your Excellency, Hansel chuckled, you can't use an isolated case to illustrate the situation. Besides, Princess Catherine was raised in royalty, with a privileged family background that most people don't have. The education she received and the opportunities she had to develop far surpass those of most men in the country, and, Hansel's lips curled slightly, if His Majesty the King had an equally outstanding prince, Princess Catherine probably wouldn't be as dazzling as she is now. Paul had no choice but to ask everyone, what are your opinions on appointing Miss Diaz as the head of the Ministry of Education? Everyone looked at each other, then lowered their eyes and mouths, remaining silent. After spending so much time together, everyone admired the female advisor's knowledge, but appointing a woman was just too much to ask. Paul had no choice but to ask again, can anyone step forward to recommend themselves for the position of head of the Ministry of Education? Or recommend a subordinate, that would be fine too. Still, no one spoke. These roughnecks from the Northwest Bay knew their place. Education, after all, was something they couldn't handle. Among the high-caliber talents from the capital, Bernard served as the chief secretary, spending every day with Paul handling various documents and scheduling. Guy Burns, the newly appointed factory manager, was a tech geek who wanted nothing but technical expertise. Being a factory manager was already a challenge for him. Neither of them wanted to take on more work. The only one with ambition was Hansel, who was power-hungry. However, Hansel was also self-aware. As the head of the Ministry of Agriculture, he had a lot of work to do in agriculture. He had just been criticized by the Lord for the slow progress in consolidating farmland, and he was also in charge of accepting immigrants and recruiting talent from other regions, keeping him extremely busy. Now, he was quickly thinking about who to recommend for the position of head of the Ministry of Education. Of course, the pool of talent he had recruited would be limited to those who were also from the capital. But Hansel couldn't find anyone who met all three criteria, arrived relatively early, highly capable, and had a certain degree of compatibility with the Lord. He arrived early, that's for sure. Who would appoint a newcomer to such an important position? He's highly capable, that's also essential, otherwise, even he wouldn't approve of him, as he's always judged people by their abilities. A certain compatibility with the Lord is also crucial. The old man from the northwest goes without saying, he's the Lord's core support. Among the high-ranking officials from outside, Bernard started with simple tasks and gradually gained the Earl's approval. Guy Burns shares the Earl's interests, both are passionate about technology. As for himself, he and the Earl mutually benefit from each other, it's a kind of alliance. Damn it. You only realize how few people you have when you need them. Are we just going to watch such an important position fall into that woman's hands? The Lord clearly values education highly. Just as Hansel was sweating profusely with anxiety, Paul spoke up. Since no one can come up with a good candidate, I think Miss Diaz should temporarily take charge of education affairs. However, given that there is only one school under the jurisdiction of the Council of State in the territory, Weiss Academy, which is not as busy as other departments, I have decided to change the Ministry of Education to the Department of Education. The department is a unit one level below the ministry. Miss Diaz will temporarily serve as the head of the Department of Education, or rather, the acting head. What do you all think? No one spoke. No one objects. Paul changed his questioning style. Oh, I think this is fine. Finally, someone spoke softly, and the others nodded slightly, tacitly agreeing with the Earl's decision. Then it's settled. Only Hansel was unhappy. Didn't anyone see that the Earl was using a strategic retreat? I guarantee that woman will be on par with the heads of the various departments within 2 years, and the Department of Education will be upgraded back to the Ministry of Education. Hansel generally approved of the female advisor's abilities, but he still felt uneasy about a woman holding such an important position. He would have accepted it if the female advisor hadn't clashed with him on the refugee issue, but since the two had policy differences, he certainly didn't want her to gain more power. Chapter 205 Year End 5. Eileen Rodney's inner turmoil was palpable. On one hand, the men in the hall were visibly resentful of her appointment as head of education. She was furious. Why did they look down on her just because she was a woman? On the other hand, Eileen was also quite surprised by Paul's appointment. After all, it certainly didn't conform to tradition. Damn tradition. Seriously, why didn't this guy consult her beforehand? It was so sudden. She wasn't prepared at all. If she had been prepared, she might have been able to deliver a passionate inaugural address and change the minds of these men who looked down on women. But perhaps Earl Gleman's decision was truly impromptu. In any case, the little princess suddenly felt a surge of gratitude towards Paul, a gratitude for her abilities being recognized. Unlike her sister Catherine, Eileen had never liked politics or warfare and aspired to be a scholar. His Majesty the King was pleased with her development in this direction. As the ruler of a nation, having 2 children skilled in military and political affairs wasn't a good thing, and besides, this was the normal behavior for a girl. However, her sister Catherine's performance was simply too dazzling. Eileen had grown up surrounded by praise for her sister, and although the 2 sisters had a very close relationship, there was always a slight resentment deep down. Now that Paul had given her an opportunity, how could Eileen not be happy? Earl Gleman, Eileen stood up and bowed solemnly to Paul. I will certainly not let you down. Then she sat down without saying another word, silently vowing to impress the men present in a year. Then do your best, Paul casually encouraged her. In fact, he had eliminated a bunch of unsuitable candidates using a process of elimination and found that there was really no one else available besides the 2 female advisors. And Miss Laddie, one of the ladies, would be responsible for some work related to the occult in his plans, so he had delegated the education work to Miss Diaz. It was not, as Hansel had speculated, a retreat to advance. If there was a man with equally good qualifications, he would subconsciously give priority to employing him. Gentlemen, the Lord said, I'd like to announce the industries we plan to develop next year. The kind that sell to other regions. Hearing this, everyone perked up. Steel smelting, cotton textiles, printing. This was the result of numerous discussions between Paul, Steward Ford, and a few others, and now it was being announced publicly to the entire high-ranking officials of the council. Elon asked somewhat curiously, Paul, besides printing books, the ironware and textiles from Arda and Barden seem uncompetitive. Why not invest resources in industries that have proven profitable, like porcelain and paper making? He only knew that Paul had developed a very versatile printing press capable of mass-producing books. I apologize for not informing you all sooner. In textiles, I will order the machine factory to improve the currently popular spinning and weaving machines. Optimistically, the efficiency could be increased 40 times. As for iron smelting, we already have a complete new production process, a process that can crush our competitors worldwide. I believe it will be put into production soon. Is that right, Mr. Burns? Guy Burns stood up and nodded to Paul. It should be finished around the new year, then I'm relieved. Be sure to let me know when it's done so I can witness the production of the first furnace of iron. If it were 6 months ago, everyone would have thought the Lord was exaggerating, but now no one thought so. Paul suddenly remembered something. Once the textile industry develops, we can produce cheaper uniforms for our soldiers. Currently, the Alda Army's uniforms are still in the local guerrilla style. Perhaps the natives of this world don't think much of it, but to him, this style combined with lineup shooting is too incongruous. So, only the Imperial Guard and Lobster soldiers are truly suited to lineup shooting? Oh, Your Excellency, are you planning to improve the current uniforms? It was Bryce who spoke, his face beaming with excitement. I have quite a few new ideas in my head. Paul found it amusing and chuckled. You have ideas too? Alright, when we get back, you draw yours, I'll draw mine, and the Navy will also draw one, then we'll discuss it together. They had discussed most of the issues. It was time to end the meeting. If there are no other questions, let's call it a day. Oh, Your Excellency, there is actually one more thing. Oh? Chief Steward Ford, please speak. Old Ford cleared his throat. This year, quite a few immigrants have arrived, and according to the plan, even more will come next year. Should we consider where to settle them, not in terms of work, but in terms of accommodation? Many of them are single and will eventually settle down and start families. They can't keep living in our temporary official residences. Paul was puzzled. Was this even a problem? In his plan, immigrants would be prioritized for resettlement in Lakeside Town and Port Fulton, but the proportion had to be controlled, with a population mainly consisting of local residents and workers recruited from various parts of the Northwest. Once they've earned enough money, they can buy houses near their workplaces or hire people to build them. Right, the old manager shook his head. That's true, but with so many people arriving all of a sudden, we can't just build houses anywhere, can we? There needs to be a plan. We didn't have this problem when the town was small, but with so many people coming all at once, we really need to think about it carefully. What you say makes sense. Alright, who will be in charge of this? I don't know much about urban planning, Your Excellency. Urban planning should be left to professionals. We can definitely find professionals in this field in big cities. In that case, let's find the best. The largest city in the kingdom is Crystal Radiance, right? Let's hire a planner from the capital to design something for us, focusing on Lakeside Town, Fulton Port, and Buchwaya. Isn't this a bit overkill? We need to think long term. Haha, maybe Lakeside Town can even develop into a city of 100,000 people. Everyone clicked their tongues in amazement. Was Earl Gleman dreaming? Hansel, please keep an eye out for this next time you go to the capital. I understand, Your Excellency. Finally, everyone had no further questions, and Paul adjourned the meeting. Chapter 206 Returning Home. Off the coast of Franklin Harbor, the Hope was on patrol. After Quake took command of the South, Yarman became captain of the Hope, and he was thrilled to command this battle-hardened warship. The Hope hadn't been in service long, and its previous battles with pirates had left it virtually undamaged, making it practically a new ship. Captain Yarman was now carefully inspecting the deck, which the sailors had cleaned. He was barefoot, wearing only white cloth socks, walking from one end of the deck to the other. After walking back and forth several times, the captain took off his socks, noticing the soles were still as white as before, and nodded in satisfaction. Yarman announced loudly, "Today's deck cleaning is complete." The surrounding sailors breathed a sigh of relief and gathered their buckets, brushes, mops, and other cleaning tools. "Captain, something's up," The lookout on the mast suddenly shouted. The entire ship immediately went on high alert, gunners rushing to their positions to prepare for any eventuality. Yarman shouted to the lookout, "What do you see? A ship. A suspicious ship is approaching." "It's not a civilian vessel, it's a sailing ship," someone on deck asked. "At this hour, we should be the only ones on patrol." Could it be the South? So far, the only sailing ships they knew of were from the Alden Navy. The lookout, still holding his binoculars, kept his eyes fixed on the suspicious vessel in the distance. "I don't know if it's the South, we can't see clearly yet," a sailor on deck dismissed the lookout's words. "Honestly, who else could it be but the South?" Overly cautious. "Shut up," Yarman sternly reprimanded the sailor, who jumped to attention, awaiting the captain's reprimand. "Carelessness can cost the entire ship its life. I don't want to hear such carelessness again, do you hear me?" The captain's roar was like thunder. The sailor slapped his right foot onto his left and shouted, "Yes, Captain." Yarman immediately gave the order, "Gun crews, to your positions. Helmsman, take the windward." As the two ships drew closer, they finally saw each other clearly. "It's the South. It really is the South." The lookout's voice was filled with surprise as he recognized the flag flying on the mast of the distant ship, the Griles family's dragon flag. A cheer erupted on the deck of the Hope. "Helmsman, move closer to the South." "I've really missed that bastard quake," Captain Yarman cheerfully issued a new order. "We're home." The deck of the South was filled with excited shouts. Today was December 25th, in a few days it would be the new year. The South had set sail on November 11th and, after nearly a month and a half at sea, had finally returned to the Northwest Bay. Unfortunately, they ultimately failed to reach the Northwest Bay before Advent Day. To save time and avoid missing the new year, the entire crew spent a memorable day at sea. They spotted the Hope patrolling in the distance. Since most of the crew on the Southern had served on the Hope, seeing it was like seeing a brother. The signalmen on both sides exchanged endless flag signals through binoculars, while other sailors asked the signalmen to convey their greetings. "Everyone's so excited to see things from home," Shara remarked, looking at the cheering sailors on deck. "Yes, no matter how good other places are, they can't compare to the place where you were born and raised." Her daughter, the advisor Letty, responded with a touch of sadness. "Mom, will you blame me for making you leave home with me?" Shara smiled and shook her head, reaching out to stroke her daughter's long hair. "Stop talking nonsense. Didn't I already say this? Home is where we are." "Thank you, Mom." The female advisor choked up a little, and Shara hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe away the tears from her eyes. "People will laugh at us if they see this." The South and the Hope finally met, and they could hear each other's shouts through the loudspeakers. "Quake. You bastard, you're still alive, Yarman." "I'm fine, but you're still not in a shark's belly." The captains of both ships personally hugged the loudspeakers and greeted each other. The people on both ships laughed heartily, and the sea was filled with cheerful sounds. Then the Hope and the South sailed one after the other towards Fuelan Port. "Congratulations, Captain Quake. You've finally completed the task the Lord gave you." Shara came to Quake's side and congratulated the captain. After so many days on the ship, she had also learned most of the things about the Earl of Alda. The ship, named Southern, was tasked with opening new sea routes, preparing for large-scale maritime trade between the Northwest Bay and Cape Bay in the future. Judging from this, Earl Paul Gleman seemed to be a diligent and ambitious man. "Haha, congratulations, Lady Sisha. From now on, you can live with Miss Laddie, avoiding the pain of separation." Yes, this child used to be an adventurer, often away from home. Now she's finally settled down. Although it's a strange place, it's better than not seeing anyone for a long time. Quake became somewhat hesitant, seemingly considering something. Lady Sisha noticed his expression and asked, "Captain, is there something you want to ask me?" There's indeed a question on my mind. But I don't know how to say it." "Haha, Captain, just say it." Quake made up his mind and said softly, "Lady Sisha, to be honest, I used to be a pirate. Later, I was captured by Earl Griles, who showed me mercy and allowed me to redeem myself through service. That's how I joined the Navy and rose to the rank of captain, so, I'm quite familiar with piracy." So, haha, you want to ask about a tattoo on your arm, right?" Shara rolled up half of her sleeve, revealing a symbol on her arm, a strange skull. Yes, although the design is a bit odd, the skull is a common symbol of pirates, and judging from your behavior when you went to the forest north of Nisburg to look for Miss Laddie last night, you don't seem like an ordinary housewife, Captain. You are very observant." Shara smiled and said frankly, "Indeed, I was a pirate before." Chapter 207 Homecoming 2. Lady Saoirse's frankness surprised Captain Quake. "Oh, I really didn't expect that." He didn't know what to say. No wonder Lady Saoirse said she used to be a seaman. "So that's what kind of seaman? Which pirate crew were you in?" Although it felt a bit impolite to pry into someone's past, especially a woman's, curiosity still compelled Quake to ask. Lady Saoirse, however, showed no displeasure and answered directly, "The Red Fang pirate crew. Have you heard of it, Captain?" "Oh, the Red Fang pirate crew. That's the legendary pirate crew I used to talk about every day when I was a pirate. Even Edward, the great pirate who used to dominate the Northwest Bay, came from there. Later, he broke away and went to the Northwest to operate independently. I heard that the captain, Red Fang Gerald, later disbanded the pirate crew and went on an expedition, and then disappeared without a trace." Quake's eyes were full of stars, looking on with longing. He suddenly sensed something was wrong. Wait. Red Fang Gerard? Lady Saoirse Gerard, during his days in Horn Bay, he learned the female advisor's father's surname, Gerald. Now, thinking about it, it was the same surname as that famous pirate leader, and this Lady Saoirse was Laddie's mother, and had once served in the Red Fang pirate crew. Quake was utterly shocked. Could it be you too? Haha, you guessed right. Lady Saoirse covered her mouth and laughed. Red Fang Gerard is my husband, and Laddie is our daughter. This is truly unbelievable. After my husband disbanded the pirate crew, the family settled in Messiah, an independent territory in Horn Bay, but unexpectedly, he disappeared while exploring alone. At this point, a look of sadness appeared on Lady Saoirse's face. My daughter was still young then, and I raised her alone. One of the reasons Laddie became an adventurer was because she wanted to find out about her father. However, after so many years without any leads, I suppose her desire has faded," Quake said regretfully. "Please accept my condolences, madam." The sadness on Lady Saoirse's face quickly disappeared. "Thank you, Captain. I've gotten used to it over the years." "Huh? I remember only one ship went out today. How come two have returned?" "Foolish. That's the Southern. The Southern is back." "Huh? The Southern? I hadn't heard from it for so long, I thought." As they approached the port of Franklin, the people on the dock recognized the ship that had returned with the Hope, the Southern, which had sailed south to open a new route a month and a half ago. The news quickly spread throughout the small dock area, and people gathered to watch the Southern's return. The South lowered its sails and slowly approached the berth. Sailors threw down mooring lines, and the dock workers pulled together, gently hauling the South into the berth before securing the lines firmly to the stakes. After anchoring, a gangplank connected the ship to the dock. A loud voice boomed from the ship, "Brothers and sisters of the Northwest Bay, your South is back. Your Quake is back." Quake was the first to step onto the gangplank and come ashore, opening his arms and shouting to the crowd, who responded with cheers. "Captain Quake, congratulations on returning home." Immediately, people who recognized him rushed forward to embrace him. The other crew members also followed, stepping onto the dock one after another. People who knew them swarmed around them, asking questions, and the dock was bustling with activity. Soon, some quick-thinking individuals ran to inform the naval headquarters, the city hall, and the shipyard. Naval Commander Austin, accompanied by a group of officers, Mayor Theodore, with his staff, shipyard supervisor Reuben, and veteran shipwright Benjamin, along with other craftsmen, arrived at the dock. Our heroes, Theodore embraced Quark and the naval officers and 4 merchant representatives one by one, amidst cheers from the surrounding crowd. "You are the farthest people have ever traveled in Alda's history." This expedition, which had set out from Laketown, had completed this feat, a journey worthy of being recorded in history, and during his tenure, how could Theodore not be overjoyed? And they sailed this great expedition from the sea in full-fledged sailing ships. Reuben and Benjamin were almost weeping with joy. Their efforts had not been in vain. Quark and the others' successful return proved that the ships they had built were usable and reliable, a round trip of thousands of nautical miles. Only Austin remained relatively calm. He offered Quark and the others a few words of encouragement, then announced that all crew members of the Southern would be given a day off. He saw the female advisor, Laddie, and several people around her, and walked up to her, asking, "Miss Laddie, I didn't expect your identity to be known. Are these two your family members? The female advisor said somewhat apologetically. Yes, I'm so sorry to have troubled the Navy. Let me introduce you. Mother, this is Lord Austin of the Navy in Alda. Commander Austin, this is my mother, Shara Sisha, and this is my adopted sister, Lisa. Austin bowed to the two ladies. Hello, Mrs. Sisha. Hello, Miss Lisa. The two women quickly returned the bow. You're too kind, Commander. Theodore patted Austin on the shoulder. Come on, let's go to the town hall to celebrate for our heroes. Arthur, notify the chefs we arranged to meet at the town hall. I hope the celebration banquet can begin within 3 hours. An officer beside him immediately responded, Yes, Mayor, and then dashed off like a shot. Austin reminded Theodore, Mayor, don't forget to inform the merchants. After all, the Lord sent the Southern to Horn Bay to expand trade, of course. How could I forget them? I sent someone to inform them before we came. Theodore already knew about the female advisor's journey south with her family, so he extended an invitation to Lottie's family, saying he would send someone back to Lockhart the next day. The crowd then surged towards the town hall, surrounding the officers and sailors of the Southern. Meanwhile, Theodore also sent someone on horseback to Lockhart to deliver the news of the Southern's return to the Lord as quickly as possible. Chapter 208 Outlook. Mayor Theodore of Port Follin warmly welcomed Quark and his party at the town hall. Aside from the crew of the Southern, the merchants were the most lively group at the banquet. The buildings there are tall and grand, even the commoners' houses are beautifully decorated, merchants are highly respected there and can even influence the government, people dress well, live comfortably, and are willing to spend money. The crowd surrounded the 4 representatives who had toured Cape Horn, eagerly and enthusiastically discussing their observations in this foreign land. Based on their descriptions, Cape Horn had become a merchant's paradise, a land of gold, in everyone's minds, and many regretted not being born there. I spent a whole day at the dock, not for anything else, but just to count the number of merchant ships that came and went throughout the day. Guess what? A full 55 large merchant ships came and went that day. Oh my God, what a sight that must have been. Mr. Bennett, who made his fortune in shipping, exclaimed upon hearing this from one of the representatives. In comparison, Flanders Port used to see only a few merchant ships a week, but recently, with the State Council's strong support for industry and commerce, the port has gradually come back to life. He hoped it could become as prosperous as Cape Bay. The market in Niceburg gathers goods from all over the world. Except for those perishable specialties, you can buy almost anything you can imagine there. A factory owner who had built a porcelain factory asked doubtfully, Do they even have porcelain? We haven't been producing porcelain here for very long. Another representative looked resentful, put his hand to his mouth, and whispered, I'll tell you something. Seeing his caution, everyone leaned closer. The representative whispered, Porcelain has already appeared in Horn Bay. Our Lord has secretly started doing business with Horn Bay, and the partner is the Foster family, who hold a seat in the Horn Bay Alliance Council. What? So Lord Griles had already made contact with them? He didn't even tell us. I saw a very different caravan in Lakehart Town. Their clothing was completely foreign. Could it be the Foster family? Then they must have come from the land. That's quite a distance. It must have taken at least 2 months round trip. They even had to cross the rebel territory to the south. Given the Foster family's status and power, even royal families from various countries would give them some face. Grand Duke Reedwolf probably wouldn't make things difficult for the Foster family's caravan, unless he doesn't want to do business with his southern neighbors anymore, the merchants discussed animatedly, quite surprised that Arda and Horn Bay had already established trade relations. The representative continued, however, I've only seen decorative porcelain in a merchant guild headquarters. I haven't seen any for sale in the market. The land transport capacity must be too small. It sells out immediately upon arrival in Cape Bay, with supply falling short of demand. Besides, Earl Gleman's porcelain factory doesn't produce a large quantity, the factory owner exclaimed excitedly. So, if I could transport my goods to Cape Bay, I'd definitely make a fortune, of course. The wealth of the people of Cape Bay is incomparable to our poor folks here. Even the nobles in the Northwest are incredibly stingy. Oh, I mean the nobles other than Lord Gleman. Having traveled and seen the world, the merchant's representative spoke somewhat bluntly, but his words sparked endless imagination among the other merchants, and many considered investing in the porcelain industry. What about salt? Salt merchant Godwin Toby, having visited several salt-producing factories under the technical guidance of the State Council, was most concerned about whether his salt could fetch a good price in Cape Bay. The prospects for salt are also excellent. Their salt, like ours before, is boiled, and the price is outrageously high. Great. Excellent. Godwin's eyes lit up, as if countless gold coins were about to rain down on him. After the merchants enthusiastically discussed the bright future, they all realized they had forgotten the most important issue: transportation capacity. How will we transport the goods? Naturally, with those wind-powered ships invented by Earl Gleman, like the Hope and the Southern. Although Lord Gleman has indicated he'll sell these ships to the public, it seems the shipyard's capacity isn't quite sufficient. Transporting goods was indeed a headache. Land transport was out of the question. They didn't have the influence of the Foster family, and traveling there would surely result in being ripped off at every turn. So the group gathered around Reuben, the shipyard's supervisor. Supervisor Reuben, what's the shipyard's current production schedule? When can we accept civilian orders? Although he knew the merchants were impatient, Reuben was helpless. He said with a sigh, "Oh dear, this is really difficult. Right now, we have to prioritize meeting the Navy's warship needs." Just as the merchants were feeling disappointed, a voice rang out. "We can make room for a shipyard to build civilian ships." Everyone turned around and saw it was Navy Commander Austin. The merchants were overjoyed. "Really, Commander?" "Of course, but," Austin coughed heavily. "The Navy plans to establish a school to teach navigation skills and train a large number of qualified sailors. Of course, it won't just be for the military, students can also find jobs in the civilian sector." "That's great," the merchants praised. "But the school's facilities and costs, leave it to us, Lord Austin, we've got it covered." "It's just a school, isn't it?" Immediately, someone patted their chest and offered to solve Austin's problem, and the others, who were a step behind, chimed in. "You gentlemen are truly kind-hearted. Seeing how generous you are, our Navy will dedicate a shipyard specifically for building merchant ships." The merchants beamed, toasting Austin one after another. Nearby, shipyard supervisor Reuben wiped his brow with a handkerchief. The Earl of Gleman had already decided to allocate a portion of the shipyard's capacity for building civilian merchant ships, but the commander-in-chief had asked him to play along with this charade. Austin, while exchanging toasts with the merchants, was secretly delighted. He had suggested to Paul the establishment of a maritime school, but at the time, the State Council couldn't allocate much funding, so the two of them came up with this idea. He decided to try and strike while the iron was hot. "Gentlemen, perhaps you could raise funds to establish a technical school, specifically to train shipbuilding craftsmen." To Austin's delight, his suggestion was once again met with approval. Of course, shipyard supervisor Reuben was even happier than him. Chapter 209. The next day, Laddie and her family arrived in Lancashire town in a carriage sent by the town hall. Accompanying them were several high-ranking officers from the Southern, including Quake, though they arrived on horseback. Despite setting off early, they didn't arrive until after 5 p.m. What a charming town. Sheriff Saoirse dismounted from the carriage, observing Lancashire town in the afterglow of the setting sun. "Is this where the Lord lives? Although it's not as bustling as Horn Bay, and not even as large as the former Port Franklin, it has its own unique charm." Lancashire town is no longer what it was when Paul first took over as Lord. He built several factories on the south bank of the Vis River, including a paper mill, a porcelain factory, and a machinery factory, none of which were on the island in the lake, because transporting raw materials and finished products across the pontoon bridge was simply too inconvenient. Later, as more and more workers were recruited from outside the town and immigrants from other places arrived, the government administration simply built a large number of residences on the south bank of Lake Vis to accommodate them, and the town became increasingly vibrant with life. The government administration was planning to formally establish a residential area here, but was still hesitating whether to wait until a city planner was hired or to break ground now. To facilitate transportation between the two places, the government administration completed a land reclamation project, narrowing the waterway between the island and the lake and the south bank, leaving only a distance as wide as a typical city moat. Although it was called a project, it was actually just a matter of conscripting laborers to carry a few loads of soil. Firstly, the water was not very deep, and secondly, the island in the lake was not located in the center of Lake Vis, but in the waters far to the south. The government administration built a wide stone bridge to replace the original pontoon bridge, greatly facilitating transportation out of the town. As for security considerations, as the capital of Arda, Lake Vistown was garrisoned by the 1st Battalion of the Army, which was fully equipped with firearms. If even they could not stop the enemy, obviously a shallow lake would not be of much use. It's changed a lot since I left, there are so many more buildings, Laddie remarked, marveling at how the town changed every day. The group crossed the stone bridge and headed into town. This shop sign means, a hot water shop? Laddie, am I seeing things? You're not mistaken, Mom, haha, are you kidding me? There are shops that specialize in selling hot water. Cheryl was incredulous, but her daughter immediately adopted a serious expression. Mom, this isn't a joke, it's a matter of life and death. Lisa, listen carefully to me too. Then the female consultant solemnly gave them a lecture on microorganisms. Luckily, we're used to drinking hot water. Cheryl and Lisa turned pale, never expecting so much unseen life in the water. But Cheryl suddenly remembered drinking raw water at sea when she was young, and she felt terrible. It wasn't until they had walked halfway down the street that she calmed down a little. However, this town is quite clean, even the towns in Corner Bay can't achieve this level of cleanliness. Garbage can only be thrown into those large bins by the roadside. Did you see those people wearing red armbands? If they see you littering, you'll be fined. If you refuse to pay the fine, they'll call the police, similar to our city guards, the ones who maintain public order, to arrest the litterer and put them in jail. Fine? Jail? That's too much? It's just littering. Shouldn't this gradually cultivate people's self-discipline? Shara covered her mouth, somewhat dissatisfied with a local lord. To correct a wrong, one must go to extremes. Without going to extremes, one cannot correct a wrong. That's what the lord said. Quark and the others, walking behind, were very curious. The mother and daughter had been muttering in a foreign language since entering the town, and they didn't know what they were saying. Before long, the group arrived at the lord's mansion, where the guards of the Imperial Guard stopped them. Laddie stepped forward and spoke a few words to the soldiers, one of whom immediately went inside to report. If it were just a female advisor alone, she could simply go in. She worked at the lord's manor regularly, and the guards were quite familiar with her. However, this time, her family and the crew of the Southern were also present, and there were quite a few of them, so the guards had to be cautious. Soon, the soldier came out. His Excellency the Earl requests to meet you in the hall. So, the group followed Laddie to the castle hall, where the local lord, Paul Gleman, was already waiting for them, along with his sworn brother, Elon Gardner, and another female advisor, Miss Betty Diaz, who stood on either side of him. The officers of the Southern stood in unison, solemnly saluting their lord with a standard military salute, a peculiar way of saluting that piqued Shara's curiosity. Welcome, my heroes, and, the two ladies from Horn Bay, Paul and Theron stepped forward and embraced the officers of the Southern, while Eileen went to hug Laddie. Come, let's not stand, let's all find a place to sit. After everyone was seated, Laddie introduced her mother and Lisa to Paul. Lady Sisha, Miss Lisa, I hope you will have a happy and fulfilling life here. Thank you, Earl, I am very grateful for taking in my daughter. My daughter Laddie has caused you trouble. Sharon knew that the young lord before her already knew her daughter's identity, and her words about taking her in and causing trouble went beyond simply hiring her daughter as an advisor. Paul didn't know if he understood, he just smiled and said, it's no trouble at all, she has helped me a lot. Sitting next to Shara, Lisa blushed and was too nervous to say a word. After all, she was a guest in the lord's house. However, the main focus today was on Quark and his crew. After exchanging a few pleasantries with Shara, Paul quickly struck up a conversation with them about their voyage. Quark and several officers recounted in detail their journeys to and from ports, their meeting with the Foster family, and their observations at Horn Bay. But Paul was most interested in their experiences at sea, inquiring in detail about the wind direction, ocean currents, and the distribution of towns along the coast. Do you think our long-distance trade can commence? Just in terms of maritime transport, Lord Griles, I believe absolutely, and we should begin as soon as possible. Horn Bay is truly a place brimming with wealth, Quark assured him confidently. Hearing this, Paul's confidence grew even stronger. Oh, Lord, we received a special gift at Horn Bay. Please decide what to do with it. A gift? Was it from the Foster family? No, please take a look first. Under Paul's questioning gaze, Quark gestured to another officer to carry a wooden crate to Paul. The crate, requiring 2 people to lift, looked very heavy. Quark opened the box, and the golden light that shone from it stunned Paul. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 210 The Duke's Invitation. Paul was stunned by what was inside the wooden crate. It was a whole crate of gold coins, gleaming so brightly they almost blinded his titanium alloy eyes. Can someone explain this to me? Had Quake gone back to his old ways at sea and pulled off a few big heists? Sir, this was a gift from His Majesty the Grand Duke of Eaton. We dare not handle it ourselves, so we leave it to you to decide. Paul grew increasingly puzzled. Why would the Grand Duke of Eaton send you a whole crate of gold coins? This was a whole crate of gold coins. In most countries like although people use the term gold coins to describe the amount of money, it was merely for convenience. In reality, commoners were forbidden from using gold coins. The most valuable currency among non-nobles was silver. Gold was incredibly precious in this era, and even when minted into coins, it was often mixed with other metals. Laddie, standing nearby, stood up. My lord, Paul said, the Grand Duchess of Eaton and I encountered a pack of wolves in the forest. Captain Quake and his men rescued us, and the Grand Duchess of Eaton sent this chest of gold coins as a token of her gratitude. Half of the coins are for you, and the other half are for everyone on the southern. The Grand Duchess of Eaton? And you? How are you connected? Grand Duchess Helen and I studied together. She's my senior. When we arrived in Niceburg, the capital of the Hornbay Alliance, she was visiting the alliance with her husband, so I went to visit her. Paul was astonished. He hadn't expected his female advisor to have such a background. Even so, she was forced into hiding far away. Just how rampant was the Hornbay Church? Eileen, standing nearby, seemed to recall something. The Grand Duchess of Eaton? I've heard she's a renowned beauty. Paul turned to Quake again. Since you also have a share, why not keep half the gold coins? Well, the amount is too large. We dare not handle it ourselves, so please decide. Paul was satisfied with Quake's approach. Alda currently lacked regulations regarding the handling of gifts from outsiders by public officials and military personnel. It was time to draft a standard. Amounts not exceeding the standard could be kept, while amounts exceeding it had to be turned over. Since it was currently a grace period, they would proceed according to the donor's wishes. Then I'll keep this chest of gold coins. I'll give you half of it in Aldo silver coins. Quark quickly waved his hand. Sir, this is far too much. We dare not accept it. No, this is what you deserve. After several refusals, Paul insisted that they accept it, consider it a material reward for this voyage. Seeing their lord's generosity, everyone on the southern was instantly enveloped in an unbelievable sense of happiness. That was half a chest of gold coins. Once distributed, everyone who participated in this voyage, whether officers or soldiers, would become incredibly wealthy. Then I thank you on behalf of all the officers and men on board. There's one more thing. The Duke of Eaton asked me to convey his friendship to you. If you or your envoy visit Hornbay, the Duchy of Eaton will certainly give you a warm welcome. Paul's brow furrowed. That's an unexpected bonus. In any case, you've done a great job this time. Relying on the foster family in the long run is unreliable. The more friends we have in Hornbay, the better. As a reward. Is there anything else you need me to help you fulfill? The others, having suddenly become rich, were temporarily without desires, but only Quake hesitantly raised a wish. Sir, some of my old brothers from when I was a pirate are still serving time. They missed the opportunity to redeem themselves because they didn't meet the naval recruitment requirements, but I assure you they are not heinous criminals. Could you shorten their sentences? I can forego the money. Unexpectedly, he was still a man of old friendship. All right, I promise you. After investigating, I will appropriately reduce their sentences, or even release them directly. Quake was overjoyed and thanked Paul profusely. Paul invited everyone to stay for dinner, and amidst the pleasant atmosphere, he invited them to visit the newly built ironworks in Lake Town the next day. The machine shop had already developed an experimental water-powered blast furnace system and, together with the ironworkers Paul had arranged, had selected a site beside the Vis River to build the first blast furnace. Gabberns had informed him to come and witness the first batch of molten iron produced, a momentous occasion. We will soon monopolize the steel supply in the Northwest, Paul announced confidently. Shero is curious, what gave the Lord such confidence? May I also visit your ironworks? Of course, Lady Saoirse, you are welcome to come. Paul wasn't afraid of being seen simply watching the blast furnace produce molten iron. It was a perfect opportunity to show off Arden's black technology. Just as he was about to continue describing the rosy future, Butler Philip approached with 2 wooden boxes. Your Excellency, Duke Ferdinand's residence has sent 2 invitations, one for you and one for Lord Garnard. Invitations? For me and Myron. Paul and Myron exchanged a bewildered glance. They each opened the wooden box, took out the parchment wrapped inside, and unfolded it to read. It's for the Duke's birthday, an invitation to a banquet, but the old man's birthday is still a long way off, isn't it February? More than 2 months away. Paul was furious, remembering how the Earl of Kent had extorted him using the Duke of Ferdinand's name. He'd heard that Moltskant was the Duke of Ferdinand's most obedient dog. The 2 of them were definitely in cahoots. Oh, perhaps the Duke wants us to spend more time preparing gifts. Is he trying to extort money from us under the guise of a birthday banquet? I knew it. What kind of person is Moltskant? And how good can his barking be? Paul was quite indignant. We're not going. Let him celebrate his own birthday. Absolutely not, Your Excellency. Butler Philip, standing nearby, exclaimed anxiously. Duke Ferdinand is not someone we can afford to offend. Myron, standing beside him, also advised him. Paul, more than half of the lords of the Northwest Bay are from Ferdinand's faction. Although we are direct vassals of the royal family, we cannot afford to strain our relationship with him. Paul nodded helplessly. All right, since you all say so, then I will attend his birthday banquet. As for the gift, let's have a special piece of porcelain made for him. Butler Philip and Myron finally breathed a sigh of relief. Chapter 211 Hearts of Steel 5. The next day, the group first gathered at the small dock in Lake Town, then boarded a small boat and set off for the ironworks. Besides those from the castle hall the day before, Old Ford and Hansel from the Council of State, and Schroeder and Bryce from the army were also present. They entered a tributary of the Weiss River. As the boat moved, the current grew increasingly swift, and they gradually came to a small dock guarded by Imperial Guard soldiers. After disembarking, they followed a path into a valley filled with trees, obscuring the view inside. Guy Burns, having received a report from the sentries, rode out to greet them. All right, Burns, enough talk, let's get straight to the point. Yes, Lord Griles. Burns, slightly apprehensive, led Paul and the others towards the still under construction ironworks in the valley. Like Area 51 before, this place was heavily guarded, with Imperial Guard troops patrolling with menacing military dogs, creating a chilling atmosphere. Although it was called the first batch of molten iron, Burns and the craftsmen had already conducted numerous trials. Otherwise, they wouldn't have dared to invite Paul to visit. It would have been embarrassing to make the Earl's trip in vain. Gradually, they heard the sound of splashing water. After walking through a dense forest, a waterfall appeared before them. In front of the waterfall, a building spanned the river, covering nearly 10 meters of its surface. Paul asked, "What's that building on the river?" "The water turbine room. The power for the blower comes from here." Paul was a little surprised. Was it really necessary to go to such lengths, completely covering the river? Openings were made in the walls of the water turbine room, and transmission chains extended from these openings, leading into another building located on the riverbank. Burns explained to Paul, "That building houses the blower regulator. Take me inside the water turbine room first." Burns led Paul into the water turbine room, while the others were kept outside by guards. The scene inside was an eye-opener for Paul. He had previously assumed that Burns's water-powered device would be the kind of common water wheel he was familiar with, perhaps with a more complex transmission mechanism, since it was used for blowing air. But he hadn't expected this device to be so powerful, at least visually. In the center of the room stood several large water wheels, beneath which flowed rapidly the river, almost completely filling the water's surface. Propelled by the water flow, the water wheels slowly rotated, continuously transmitting power through the transmission chain. To facilitate maintenance, we built a house on the river to protect these water wheels from external erosion. It was clear that Burns took great care of his creation. The interior of the water wheel room was quite elaborate, with stone slabs paving the floor, and steps, railings, and a passageway spanning the river for maintenance personnel. But what Paul was most concerned about was its efficiency. "Burns, how much power do these water turbines generate?" 75 horsepower. You know the word horsepower, right? It generates at least 75 horsepower per second. The two spoke as they walked out of the water turbine room, and the others left outside immediately followed. Burns led them to the blast furnace. The craftsmen stood beside the furnace, waiting for the molten iron to be refined. Upon seeing Paul arrive, they all bowed. Although it was winter, the energy emanating from the blast furnace still created a wave of heat, making those who had just approached feel as if they were in a world of contrasting ice and fire. Besides the ironworkers, there were 2 other people here, Herman and Marlowe from the 51st District Armory. They were responsible for the research and development of muskets and cannons, respectively. The manufacturing of those standardized firearms no longer required their personal involvement. Naturally, their craftsmen were responsible for production. The Navy had even transferred some of the craftsmen to build a second armory near Fland Harbor. The 2 men's main work now was to try out various improvements to firearms and cannons. As for what the 2 men were doing here, they were naturally evaluating the impact of the new iron-making method on weapons production. The female advisor, Laddie, had some knowledge of iron smelting. She had never seen such a massive furnace before and couldn't help but exclaim, "Wouldn't it be incredibly troublesome to dismantle and rebuild such a furnace repeatedly?" Paul proudly replied, "You don't know this. This furnace is reusable, and it can be used continuously. You add ore and fuel from the top, and molten iron is discharged from the bottom. Then you add ore and fuel from the top again, and molten iron is discharged from the bottom again, endlessly, without ceasing, ahem. Of course, this is only theoretical. How long it can actually be used depends on the refractory properties of the furnace material. This one is just an experiment, but I believe that with a summarization and improvement of the refractory material ratio, this kind of blast furnace will definitely be able to work continuously for a long time. I estimate that one furnace can produce over 10 tons of iron." Over 10 tons. Those who knew nothing about iron smelting were indifferent, but those who knew a little about the industry were stunned by the number Paul mentioned. This was too exaggerated. No wonder the Lord said yesterday that he wanted to monopolize the steel supply of the Northwest Bay. Hansel covered his mouth with his hand, first shocked, then overjoyed. The Lord's previous inventions had made everyone skeptical of his words. In truth, Paul had indeed exaggerated a bit. He himself wasn't sure how much iron a blast furnace could produce, and the exact figure would only be known through future experiments. The head of the ironworkers, named Conrad, was an old craftsman who had previously served the Gleman family. He ran to Paul beaming, holding an iron ingot. "Lord Gleman, look. This is the pig iron we produced in our previous experiments." Paul took the ingot and examined it several times. While everyone was focused on the blast furnace, he pulled Conrad aside and quietly asked, "Conrad, how's your experiment going? Have you encountered any difficulties?" Conrad honestly replied, "The biggest difficulty is the manufacture of the refractory material. The old, disposable furnaces didn't need this. We only started to get the hang of it after using hard clay as the main raw material. Oh, to be honest, Your Excellency, we still haven't found the optimal formula and production method," Paul encouraged him. "This can only be achieved through continuous experience accumulation. Don't stop here, don't worry, we will definitely continue to improve." Just then, someone shouted from the blast furnace, "Iron is coming out." Paul's attention was immediately drawn, and he turned and ran towards the blast furnace. "I'm really sorry everyone, I didn't finish the 2 chapters I promised, and this one was posted in the early morning. It's just that I know absolutely nothing about iron smelting. I looked up some information online, and the more I read, the more I realized it was a huge pitfall, not as simple as I thought, so I hesitated to start writing. Sigh. If I had known this would happen, I should have started preparing during the day." Chapter 212 Hearts of Steel 6. Hearing the blacksmith shout that the molten iron could be produced, Paul immediately ran to the furnace door and stared intently, while the others gathered around. The furnace door opened, and a wave of scorching heat rushed out, followed by a glistening, red-hot molten iron that flowed out like boiling lava, causing many to back away in fright. The molten iron was poured into sand molds, where it gradually cooled into ingots. Paul beamed with satisfaction. Although what they were producing was only pig iron, which still required various manual processing by the blacksmiths before it could be used, it was a revolutionary advancement compared to the world's traditional smelting techniques. The other visitors marveled, many seeing such a scene for the first time. "Herman, yes, Lord Griles, give me this iron to forge a sword. I want to see the quality of the iron we've produced." "Yes," Paul gathered the craftsmen present, encouraging them to continue their efforts and improve the ironworks production capacity. He gave Conrad a bag of silver coins as a reward, instructing him to assess everyone's contributions and distribute the coins. Amidst cheers of long life, Paul led the group of visitors out of the valley, with Guy Burns accompanying him back to Lake Town. "Your Excellency," Hansel said obsequiously, approaching Paul. "You've once again accomplished the plan you showed me. I was a little hesitant to believe the part about iron smelting. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if you could conjure a warehouse full of swords and armor in an instant. Haha, then I'd be a wizard. The church would burn me at the stake. If you really had that ability, the church would be scrambling to win you over. Let's get down to business, about the royal family." This guy, after all, was a representative sent by the royal family, and he was even eyeing his career. Several batches of grain had been sent, but so far, the royal family seemed to have offered him no direct assistance. However, Hansel was still worth courting. He had been diligent and effective in recruiting people for Arda in the capital, attracting many refugees. "Oh, you mean His Majesty the King? Don't worry, I certainly won't forget." Paul patted Hansel on the shoulder, assuring him. "Once a few more blast furnaces are built, the iron smelted in those furnaces will be exclusively supplied to His Majesty the King's army." Hansel beamed. "I knew you were so loyal to His Majesty the King. Even the Lord of Light would be moved by you." "Earl," Hansel was trying to ingratiate himself with Paul when he was interrupted by someone else. Sir Abbot, I have something to discuss with Lord Griles." "May I speak first?" Guy Burns eagerly stepped between the two. Hansel frowned slightly in displeasure. This mechanic was so oblivious to social cues, though he seemed to be quite favored lately. He immediately resumed his smiling expression and extended a hand. "Please, Mr. Burns, then I won't stand on ceremony, thank you. Lord Gleman, I have something I'd like to say to you." "Oh? What is it?" Paul was curious. Burns had been silent since leaving the ironworks, seemingly brewing something in his mind. "Do you remember that day in the office, when you pointed to the boiling kettle and asked me to look at it more closely?" "Oh, you mean that? Did you see something?" Paul was a little surprised. Could it be? He really saw something? "Yes, sir. I saw it. It's the future." "I saw the future?" Burns slapped his thigh, his face suddenly becoming somewhat excited. "What is this future you're talking about?" "Steam, using steam to provide power, to create machines like windmills and water wheels." "Wow." Paul was taken aback. He hadn't expected him to actually figure it out. "Burns, you're a genius. You actually discovered it yourself." Burns clasped his hands to his chest, looking at Paul with utter admiration. "Oh, no, it's you, sir, who first thought of this. It's a truly bold and creative idea. I'm completely humbled." "Haha, you're definitely a born mechanic. You, Earl, are the one who..." Suddenly, a disdainful voice came from the side. "TCH. What kind of creativity is that?" Burns was furious and turned to find the source of the voice. He saw that it was Betty Diaz, the female advisor walking behind them. Seeing that she was a beautiful young lady, he couldn't continue to be angry. "Miss Advisor, I admit you are very knowledgeable, but what you said is a bit biased." Paul also stared at her with an expression that said, "Tell me, what else is this if not creativity?" Eileen had been listening to their conversation, but she couldn't stand their mutual flattery any longer and decided to show them what it meant to be outdone, especially Paul Gleman, whose series of inventions had recently made him a bit arrogant. However, his inventions were indeed very useful. "My words are not biased. Using steam power has been done before, and it was done more than 1,000 years ago." Eileen's words successfully caught their attention. Historical records state that before the ancient Bella Empire, a sage named Rosie created a device called the steam ball, which would rotate continuously after boiling water. Later, he also used steam power to create a rotating temple door. When believers wanted to enter the temple, they only needed to offer some sacrifices, and someone hiding in the shadows would open the steam passage, causing the temple door to rotate and open, as if an unseen magical force was opening it. Unfortunately, his inventions have been lost. Paul was secretly surprised. So, someone actually recognized the power of steam. Unfortunately, the technology of more than 1,000 years ago was not enough to create a real steam engine, and it couldn't be used for production. He waved his hand, feigning disdain. "Those are just toys and gimmicks. The steam engine I'm going to create is not that kind of trinket." Burns nodded repeatedly. "Steam engine? What a name." "Yes, Miss Advisor, the Earl and we aim to create a machine that provides a continuous source of power, like windmills and water wheels. saving a great deal of manpower. Eileen looked incredulous. HMPH. A pipe dream. The power of wind and water is far beyond what soft steam can achieve. The deeds of the sage Rosie are just legends. Isn't that right, laddie? Another female advisor said somewhat awkwardly. Oh, Betty, although I can't imagine what a steam engine would look like either, I believe the Earl can definitely create it. Ah. You're not on my side? I'll teach you a lesson. Ah. Ignoring the two women's bickering, Paul said apologetically to Burns, you can see the potential of steam, which is good, but I don't plan to work on it at this stage. Why, Earl? Burns asked incredulously. Chapter 213 Hearts of Steel 7. Why, Your Excellency, Burns looked like a child who had been refused a toy by his parent. He had fully expected Paul to praise him and support his research in this field, but instead, the praise was followed by a cold shower. This is a complicated matter, and it can't be explained in a few words. Paul looked troubled, unsure how to explain it to Burns, and also unsure if his own thinking was correct. First of all, while the principle of using steam as power is simple, I've tried to deduce it, and there are still many technical details to resolve. It can't be done in a short time, Burns said resolutely. You're right, but I'm fully prepared to face these difficulties, but I can't wait. Next year, the research and development tasks at the machine factory will be very heavy. I have many ideas that you need to implement, and we can't be held back by a steam engine that may never be completed. Besides, it's not necessarily appropriate for a steam engine to appear at this time. Burns was puzzled. What do you mean? Windmills and water wheels are too limited by weather and geographical factors, but if a steam engine is built, factories like ironworks can spring up everywhere. Paul shook his head. What's the use of building so many ironworks? It's extremely useful. With more ironworks, your territory can produce more iron. What use do I have for so much iron? This, Burns felt it was absurd. Did the Earl know what a large amount of iron meant? But due to the other party's status, he couldn't say it outright. You can use it yourself or sell it to others. Making weapons and farm tools all require iron, don't they? That's true, but if the ironworks we visited were completed as planned, its output would be more than enough to meet the needs of Arda and Berdon, and it could even sell large quantities to other territories. The reason I upgraded the iron-making technology is because agriculture and other industries in our territory require more iron than before, and also because the rebellion in the south could bring us some profit. However, both our territory and the surrounding territories have an annual limit on iron demand, and the rebellion in the south will eventually be quelled. If we keep increasing production, the excess iron won't be sold and will just rust in warehouses. Eventually, because there's no profit, we'll have to close the ironworks, leaving only a few factories that can meet the supply and demand balance. And all this has involved countless human and financial costs. Burns was speechless. Look, why invest so many resources in developing a steam engine when there's no real demand? The existing water resources in Alda and Berdon are enough for us to build several ironworks, but if we combine a steam engine with a harvester, we can use it for agriculture. It's the same principle as iron smelting. If we produce too much grain but don't have enough people to eat it, the price will drop. It's certainly good for city dwellers to have abundant and cheap grain, but it's not good for those who produce grain in the countryside. Lord Griles, the world will never lack hungry people, so what? Do they have the money to buy it? Am I supposed to be so benevolent as to pay for my own travel expenses to deliver grain to those who have nothing? All right, Lord Griles, you have a point. Burns seemed convinced. Paul had another concern he hadn't voiced. His future plans prioritized industrial development, a crucial step being the conversion of over half the population into an industrial workforce. If advanced technologies emerged, allowing one machine to replace dozens of workers, it would hinder the conversion. Now that a group of skilled workers had been trained, were they really going to send them back to farming? Paul remembered reading in his textbooks about the massive machine-destroying movement in Britain after the Industrial Revolution, caused by the high efficiency of machines leading to mass unemployment. While the number of machines and factories could be controlled to keep it within current societal needs, this would inevitably result in a less industrialized societal structure, with a population still primarily agricultural. Those few factories heavily reliant on machines were key nodes in Paul's power. If these nodes were destroyed for any reason, he couldn't immediately rebuild them, and would be forced to regress to the level of a minor lord he was when his memories first returned. Therefore, He preferred to maintain some backward productivity to preserve the industrial population and gradually convert the agricultural population by leveraging the increasing demand for industrial products. This way, even if some were lost due to war or other reasons, the remaining population could continue industrial production. For the same reason, he subconsciously rejected utilizing the world's mystical powers. After witnessing Laddie and the sorcerer's performance, Paul did consider using magic to develop industry, but after several conversations with a female advisor, he abandoned the idea. First, magic was too esoteric, even mages themselves didn't understand it, and the spells he learned from Laddie didn't help him. Second, Paul didn't want to rely too heavily on mages. Aside from the fact that the church's current attitude towards mages might cause him trouble, even if mages were legalized one day and they had ways to trigger a massive explosion in productivity, the mages' monopoly on this advanced productive force would inevitably create a terrifying class. According to the female advisor, magic demands extremely high talent, and may even be related to bloodline, unlike science and technology, where even the least intelligent person can grasp a basic understanding through hard work. Furthermore, given the relatively small number of mages, they can become critical nodes where a single mishap could cause the collapse of the entire industrial system. The path must be chosen carefully from the outset. Once the route is wrong, the cost of changing it is enormous, especially after the formation of interest groups. He still hoped that society could be as fair as possible. Therefore, Paul set his tone for his attitude towards magic. For now, prevention is paramount. Once he has the ability to further explore it, he can study and utilize it, but he must never rely on it. Only when the need is urgent and no conventional alternative can be found will he resort to the power of magic. Chapter 214 Scrap Metal. Smack! Guy Burns was startled by a hard slap on the back, and the sullen expression on his face vanished instantly. It turned out that Paul, seeing his dejected look, decided to encourage him. He'd still need him for a lot of work later. Hey! What are you thinking about? You look like you've stepped in dog poop. Burns blushed. Oh, I'm annoyed that I didn't see as far ahead as you do. HMPH, you can't fool me. You're blaming me for not letting you work on the steam engine, aren't you? Burns frantically waved his hands. No, sir, how could I blame you? Paul stroked his chin, feigning thought. How about this, Burns? You can use some of the machine shop's resources and manpower to research the utilization of steam. Yes, sir, I certainly won't. What, did I hear that right? Burns was quite surprised. Had the Earl changed his mind? You heard me right, but my requirement is that it doesn't affect the normal operations of the machine factory. I hired you to do the work, not to satisfy your personal hobbies. Burns stood at attention and gave Paul a military salute he had learned in the army. Lord Gleman, please rest assured, I will definitely not affect other research and production tasks. Paul put on a serious expression and said, I hope so. I will keep an eye on you and will regularly check the machine factory's expenditures on various projects. Although he had been warned by Paul, the sullen expression on Burns' face was no longer visible. His steps became lighter, and he even hummed a little tune as he walked. Although Paul didn't need the steam engine yet, preliminary research and technological accumulation were still necessary so that he could use it immediately when needed. If his plan went smoothly, the steam age would arrive sooner or later. Of course, he certainly wouldn't invest too many resources and attention in this area. In addition, he also had an idea, to try to let the natives of this world break through certain areas on their own without his interference. The development of society ultimately cannot rely on the foresight of one or two people. However, this process was bound to be long and arduous. Looking at Guy Burns's cheerful expression, Paul grinned mischievously. How, Burns, he thought, it took 84 years from the invention of the steam engine to its practical application on Earth, not even including the time spent on the invention itself. I'd like to see just how capable you are. I reckon even a single cylinder will be enough to give you a run for your money. Paul resolved that he would not interfere in the development of the steam engine until he actually needed it. The group chatted and laughed all the way back to Lake Town by small boat. In the following days, the ironworks continued building new blast furnaces, while Paul quietly waited for the swords that the blacksmith Herman would forge for him. However, Paul received news that made him want to vomit blood. Herman himself came to the Lord's mansion, reporting with a frustrated expression, the iron smelted in the blast furnace was completely unusable. The iron we smelted in the blast furnace is scrap iron. The Lord's eyes widened, his face filled with disbelief. I'll go to the ironworks myself." The Lord's roar echoed throughout the castle, followed by the slamming of the office door. In the rebel camp south of Thorn Fortress, 4 men sat around a table. At the head of the table sat Samar, the rebel commander, with a mage Scott assisting him to his right. The other 2 men opposite Scott were dressed as merchants, a middle-aged man with a mustache, and a young man even younger than Scott, wearing an earring in his right ear and always sporting a faint smile, giving him a slightly frivolous air. Grand Duke Giles is extremely dissatisfied with your previous actions. If you had captured Thorn Fortress, that would have been fine, but instead you suffered heavy losses and demoralized our army. The mustachioed middle-aged man spoke sternly, conveying Grand Duke Reed's reprimand to Samar. Samar, however, kept his head down, offering no defense. "I was too greedy for glory, too eager for battle, and I have let down the Duke's trust in me," the middle-aged man with a mustache sighed. "Alice, General Samar, please remember your mission. Your army is only to keep an eye on Thorn Fortress. When the Duke arrives with a main force, he will naturally attack it. I will remember this from now on and will never act rashly again." Scott suddenly interjected, "Please tell Duke Giles that this has nothing to do with General Samar. It was I who was eager for battle and encouraged General Samar to attack Thorn Fortress. I greatly underestimated the fortress's defenses, and it also contains the long-lost Greek fire." The other 3 were quite surprised that he took the blame upon himself. Samar, in particular, was somewhat moved. This hot-headed mage named Scott, although a bit arrogant, was at least willing to take responsibility. The young man with the earring looked at Scott, smiled and nodded at him, to which Scott returned a displeased expression. Samar stood up. "Regardless, as the commander of this army, I bear the greatest responsibility. After all, the final decision rests with me. We're not here to discuss who bears the greatest responsibility, but to remind you that the main royal army will soon be heading south. They'll likely depart from Crystal Radiance next spring." Scott's face showed a hint of sarcasm. "Looks like even burning the granaries didn't hold off that princess for long," the middle-aged man snorted. "How much longer do you intend to hold them off? It's already been almost half a year. The royal family still controls most of the older kingdom. Food shortages won't affect them for long." Samar asked with slight worry, "How much longer until the Grand Duke's main force heads north? There are still a few tough nuts to crack in the south. Although their fate is sealed, the timing is uncertain, so, until then, if the royal army arrives, we'll have to rely on ourselves." "Yes, but," the young man with the earring interjected, "a group of mages will be coming to support you." Upon hearing this, Scott stood up abruptly. "As long as more mages arrive, everything will be fine." The young man shook his head. "Scott, are you going to fall into your arrogant trap again? Have you forgotten the lessons of the past?" "Nonsense, I know my limits, Mr. Scott," the middle-aged man said with a slightly displeased tone. "I know you have great power, but the kingdom's regular army is not to be underestimated. I hope you take this seriously." Chapter 215. Inside the Southern Army's camp, the 4 men continue their discussion of future battles in a slightly tense atmosphere. The middle-aged man was furious at the mage Scott's unruly behavior, but he was powerless to do anything about it and could only try to maintain a calm expression. The meeting ended unhappily. Samar and the middle-aged man left the room, while the young man with the earring and Scott remained. They were to have some internal discussions among the mages. Sigh. "Scott," the young man sighed, his flippant expression vanishing. "The higher-ups are already dissatisfied with you. They already know that it was at your instigation that Samar launched the attack, HMPH. Those old fogies, I don't care what they think. Then why were you so eager for credit before? Wasn't it just to improve your standing in the eyes of the higher-ups? Scott was exasperated, his thoughts exposed. HMPH. Anyway, you burned down Crystal Radiance's granary. That's already a great achievement. It's easy for you to say." The young man smiled, walked to Scott's side, and patted him on the shoulder. "Be patient. Gold always shines. Don't you have confidence in your enchanting skills that you're so proud of?" "How could I? I've always been proud to be an enchanter." "Yes, that's the attitude we need. When Giles clashes with the older royal family's main force, you enchanters will be invaluable. I didn't expect you to take responsibility just now. I wouldn't stoop to doing something like doing something I can't take responsibility for. And I certainly wouldn't stoop so low as to let an ordinary person take the blame for me." With his companion's encouragement, Scott regained his confidence. I will be more careful in the future and will no longer interfere militarily in Samar. How are things progressing elsewhere? Progress elsewhere, like Horn Bay? Or Northwest Bay? Did Lord Barnett go to Northwest Bay to make arrangements a few months ago? The young man said, somewhat puzzled. It's strange, we haven't heard from Lord Barnett for several months. Could something have happened to him? Scott scoffed. Don't joke around. Who in this world can do anything to Lord Barnett? Besides, isn't this a common occurrence for him? He's always been a loner, so it wouldn't be surprising if he didn't contact us for a whole year, although Barnett always looked down on them, the enchanters. Scott still acknowledged his abilities. The young man shrugged. I hope so. But there are many powerful forces in this world we don't know about. Wasn't the hellfire you encountered before one? Let's continue with the Northwest Bay. As per Lord Barnett's instructions before he left, we sent a psychic companion there to support his developing mortal forces. The lords he subdued are faithfully carrying out his prearranged plan. Moreover, the largest lord there, Duke Ferdinand, has been brought under control, so everything's going smoothly. It seems the Northwest Bay will be under our control sooner or later, hard to say. There's a large group of lords directly loyal to the Alder royal family there. I estimate a battle or two is inevitable. Any news from Horn Bay? The conflict between the upper echelons of various countries and the church is unavoidable. Our people just stirred things up between them. Oh, Scott became interested. How did they stir things up? They kidnapped the Duke of Eaton's sister-in-law and deliberately dumped her on the church. That little girl has the potential to become a mage. The Duke of Eaton must take the church now, right? That's natural. The Horn Bay Alliance originally planned to unite various countries against the church, and now they have the Duchy of Eaton as a major ally. However, something went wrong. What went wrong? We originally intended to retrieve the little girl and return her to the Duchy of Eaton, to further inflame tensions between Eaton and the church. But unexpectedly, Eaton rescued her first, and several of our compatriots disappeared during the interception of church forces. We don't know which side killed them. Scott fell silent upon hearing that a member of the Mystic Order had lost his life. The young man asked curiously, Hey, why aren't you saying anything? I said. Scott hesitated, as if carefully choosing his words. The witch hunt in Horn Bay, wasn't it actually fueled by members of our Mystic Order? Hearing Scott's words, the young man's expression turned serious. Where did you hear that? Everyone's been talking about it privately. The young man turned away, remaining silent. Samar wondered if the person beside Scott was like this too. No, not at all. Although that one has a bit of a strange temper, he's still quite easy to get along with. But what? I can still vaguely sense that this one doesn't even know how to hide it. He wears "It's your honor to speak to me" written all over his face, and not just to ordinary people, but also to his fellow mages. Is it true? Why? Why would the Arcane Society persecute its own compatriots? Shut up, the young man suddenly shouted. These are all rumors. All rumors. How could the Arcane Society possibly persecute fellow mages? Under his roar, Scott, who was a few years older than him, was actually stunned. Neither of them spoke, and the room fell into a long silence. In another part of the military camp, Samar was walking with a middle-aged man from earlier. These mages are also eccentric, the middle-aged man complained, still angry at Scott's behavior earlier. Sir Envoy, you, his arrogance, although well hidden. What a pleasant expression. But they do indeed possess powerful and mysterious abilities. One time I interrogated prisoners, it was truly eye-opening. No matter how perfectly their lies were woven, they could see through them at a glance. And that magical enchantment, it allowed an ordinary soldier to fight 10 men single-handedly. If it weren't for the legendary Hellfire, we'd be strolling through Thorn Fortress right now. Yes, the Grand Duke still relies on them, and we, as his subordinates, have to carefully accompany him. By the way, that Hellfire you mentioned, I've heard the legends about it too. Samar recalled that day's scene, saying with lingering fear, that's a powerful weapon comparable to magic. How did Grand Duke Dodge obtain it? I've never heard of it before. The middle-aged man looked hopeful. General Samar, if you could provide the Grand Duke with a method for making Hellfire, that would be a great achievement. It's a weapon that even mages would struggle with, and it could even put Scott's arrogance to shame. Samar nodded solemnly. Yes, of course I know that. Chapter 216. Inside the ironworks, Paul, Burns, Conrad, and others watched intently as a red-hot sword blank lay on the workbench. The blacksmith, Herman, picked up a hammer and struck the blank forcefully. With a cracking sound, the blank shattered into pieces. Paul and Conrad's hearts shattered as well. Herman said helplessly, "My lord, that's how it is. The blank is impossible to forge. It breaks with the slightest force." Why? Why is this happening? Paul was incredulous. How could the iron he had painstakingly forged become scrap metal? Herman, could it be that your technique is lacking? My lord, I've been forging iron for over a decade. Most of the swords in the Lord's manor were made by me. Where exactly had he gone wrong? Paul grew anxious, pacing back and forth in the room, pondering every step of the iron-making process. At this moment, Conrad said, "Your Excellency, could it be because there are too many impurities in the pig iron?" Impurities? Yes, after all, we use your newly invented coke to smelt iron. Perhaps, it contains some things that are different from the charcoal we used before, and then mixed into the molten iron. Oh, Conrad, you're a genius. You've hit the nail on the head. After Conrad's words, Paul remembered a passage he had read before, which stated that pig iron smelted with coke was unsuitable for converting into wrought iron because the coke would introduce impurities, making the wrought iron brittle and prone to breakage during forging. He also recalled a solution to this problem, the stirring method. To use this method, a remelting furnace, reverberatory furnace, must first be built. Then, the pig iron is melted in the remelting furnace. This furnace can directly use raw coal as fuel, and the iron and the raw coal used as fuel will not come into direct contact, thus the impurities in the coal will not have a harmful effect on the metal. After remelting pig iron in a reverberatory furnace, the molten iron is continuously stirred on the furnace bed by a stirrer. Through the decarburization effect of circulating air in the furnace, it is transformed into malleable wrought iron. During this process, because contact between the metal and fuel is avoided, the impurities in the resulting wrought iron are greatly reduced. Paul explained his idea, and although everyone didn't understand what decarburization meant, they all felt that the Earl's method was worth trying. So, the craftsmen in the ironworks quickly built a remelting furnace according to Paul's instructions, melting and stirring the previous scrap iron. After several days of experimentation and process improvements, they finally produced wrought iron that even the old blacksmith Herman approved of. Paul breathed a sigh of relief. If they hadn't passed this hurdle, all the previous investment would have been wasted. Under his instructions, the arsenal of District 51 began experimenting with casting cannons from iron, because iron was cheaper than copper. Once iron cannons were successfully developed, it would greatly reduce the cost of artillery and increase the number of cannons in the Arda army. As time passed, the old year finally came to an end, and the people of Laketown began preparing for the New Year celebrations, though some were happy while others were sad. Princess Eileen leaned against the windowsill, staring blankly at the heavy snowfall outside. Leah, who had just returned home from get-off work, she had found a teaching job at West Academy, saw her like this and asked softly, "Miss, are you homesick?" "Homesick? Humph. I'm not, this is my home," Leah sighed. She knew the princess was just putting on a brave face. "Your Highness, perhaps, we should go back to Crystal Radiance." "Go back to Crystal Radiance? Leah, do you expect me to surrender to your father?" "No, Eileen Rodney, will never compromise." "Then shall we send a letter to Crystal Radiance, letting them know we're safe?" "Send a letter? Are you suggesting they come to the Northwest Bay to capture me?" Leah thought to herself. It seemed the princess's resentment hadn't subsided. It was best not to provoke her. So she silently went to prepare dinner. Eileen watched the female guard walk towards the kitchen, realizing her words had been a bit harsh, and a wave of guilt washed over her. Her heart was filled with complex emotions. On one hand, she still harbored resentment and feared being taken back by her father for a political marriage. On the other hand, she truly missed her family, her sister, her mother, everyone she knew in Jingayo, even her still resentful father, especially during this important period between Advent Day and the New Year. Ugh, this is so annoying, Eileen thought, feeling a little frustrated. While the little princess was brooding, unbeknownst to her, many eyes were watching her. In a house across the street, two figures were talking. "The patrol is complete, nothing unusual. Thanks for your hard work." Sigh, "The little princess's antics have ruined our holiday." "What are you saying?" "Protecting the royal family is our basic duty. Even if the princess is in the capital, we still have to be careful during holidays." "That's true, but I'd rather do something more exciting, like infiltrating the rebels to gather intelligence, instead of taking care of a runaway child all day. If you keep saying that, I'm going to report you." We do what we're told, don't be picky. Okay, I know. By the way, we need to be even more careful from now on. Today I was interrogated by the police here for ages. Luckily I'm quick-witted and know how to fight back, otherwise they'd gotten any problems out of me. It seems Earl Gleman is paying more and more attention to security in his territory. That's a good thing. The better the security, the safer Her Highness the Princess will be. Our identities are fine, nothing will happen to us anytime soon. Besides, we haven't been spying on the secrets of the Lord's businesses or his army. We have nothing to hide, but I'm afraid of being arrested as a stalker or a peeping Tom. Shut up, we haven't been discovered yet, have we? Speaking of which, things have really changed here. I heard from the locals that just 6 months ago, this was a desolate place. Oh, that's all thanks to that young lord. I've heard quite a bit about him. What an amazing fellow. Even the princess of the kingdom is willing to work for him. The things he's tinkered with are indeed quite fascinating. If I were a scholar, I'd like to get close to him too. Have you seen the so-called open lectures at the West Academy? That microscope, my goodness, it's amazing. Oh, stop talking about it. Just thinking about those little bugs makes me nauseous. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 217. The New Year of the Holy Calendar 1991 arrived. Perhaps in the eyes of historians, many significant events occurred in the past year: the Great Rebellion in the Kingdom of Alder, the Orcs' rampant raids on the kingdom's northeastern border, the escalating tensions between the Gabella Empire and its eastern neighbors, and the conspiracies of the Horn Bay kingdoms against the Church. However, measured on a larger scale, these were merely the norm in human history. Society remained rigidly hierarchical, with an insurmountable gap between nobles and commoners. The wealthy continued their luxurious lives, scheming to accumulate even more wealth. The poor still struggled to make ends meet, worrying daily about survival. At least on the surface, the world hadn't changed because of the awakening of a foreign soul. It remained as ordinary as countless years before. In the Crystal Radiance military camp, Princess Catherine of the Kingdom of Alder was reviewing documents. Although it was New Year's Day, a figure entered her office without prior notice. Only one person had the authority to do so: the princess's confidant and best friend, Offina. "Is there something you need, Offina, Your Highness? A letter has arrived from our people stationed in the Northwest Bay." "Oh? Let me see it quickly." Catherine eagerly took the letter from Offina and began to read it carefully. A slight smile appeared on the princess's lips. She was clearly very happy. As she read, she murmured to herself with a smile, "This little girl, she's even getting involved in education now." Seeing the princess so happy, Offina also smiled slightly and asked softly, "Education? What has little Eileen been up to lately?" Catherine handed the letter to Offina. "Haha, see for yourself." It's rare to see her so enthusiastic and dedicated to something. Offina took the letter and quickly glanced through it. The letter reported that Eileen had been appointed head of the Department of Education by Paul. This wasn't exactly a secret. Personnel changes in the State Council were always publicly announced, and ordinary people could find out by simply strolling around the square in Lake Town. HMPH, that Paul Gleman probably never imagined there was a princess of the kingdom in his so-called State Council. He must have felt sorry for Eileen. Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "Don't say that, Offina. It's rare for my little sister to be so focused. Let's just consider it a learning experience for her. Has her identity been exposed? So far, there seems to be no problem. Earl Gleman hasn't raised any suspicions about her identity. He seems to genuinely believe she's a noble lady who fled from the Gabella Empire. Moreover, because education in that land is quite backward, Eileen's status as a scholar is highly respected. That's good. However, Earl Gleman has recruited many commoners as students, and Princess Eileen likes to go to that academy all the time. Isn't that a bit inappropriate? It's good for her to have more contact with the common people. Have our people keep a close eye on her, so nothing goes wrong." "Yes, Your Highness." "Should we inform our royal envoy stationed there about Princess Eileen's identity?" He was also given a position by Earl Gleman, so he's practically a colleague of the little princess. Catherine pondered for a moment, then slowly shook her head and said, "It's best not to tell him for now. The fewer people who know Eileen's identity, the better, as you command." Speaking of Earl Gleman, His territory does produce some fine things. Catherine took the letter from Offina's hand and gently stroked it. For example, the paper used in this letter, as far as I know, is produced in that earl's territory. It's truly excellent writing material. Offina readily agreed. This paper is indeed lighter than parchment, and more importantly, it's cheap enough. There's another thing that's very useful to us, canned food, also produced there. Have you tried it? I've only heard the quartermaster mention it. I heard it's a type of food that can be preserved for a long time, but I haven't tried it yet. I've already approved the quartermaster to purchase large quantities of this food. We'll need it greatly for our operations in the south after spring. As the princess spoke, she took a glass jar from a drawer and handed it to Offina. Go back and try it. It's actually made from ordinary ingredients, so the taste isn't as good as fresh, but it has the advantage of long shelf life. Our envoy stationed there personally brought it back and recommended it. We originally just wanted to get rid of those troublesome noble kids, but it actually had some effect. Offina examined the canned goods. A note on it indicated the production date and shelf life, 6 months. Aside, actually, this shelf life is made up. The first batch of canned goods hasn't even been produced for 6 months yet. If this stuff could really be preserved for as long as claimed, it would be a significant boost to the army's combat effectiveness, especially reducing logistical pressure. Your Highness, shouldn't such important things be kept in the hands of the royal government? I've considered it, but this is a sensitive time for suppressing the rebellion. It's best not to do anything that would arouse suspicion among the local lords. Yes, also, arrange for the royal family to notify the lords along the route from Arda to the capital that we will be purchasing a large amount of supplies from Arda. Tell them to be careful. Offina nodded. She knew how greedy those lords were. Caravans without strong backing would be skinned alive along the way. Your Highness, what about His Majesty and the Queen? Hearing her friend mention this, Catherine's face darkened. Sigh, they're still in a cold war. His Majesty the King may have overestimated his standing with his daughters. He only revealed his intention to marry Duke Veblen to his 2 daughters, Eileen, the person involved, and his good friend Catherine. He planned to ask the Queen to intervene only if he couldn't handle it himself, but his younger daughter simply disappeared. Of course, after Eileen ran away from home, the Queen couldn't be kept in the dark any longer. As a mother, she was naturally restless and resentful that her husband hadn't consulted her beforehand. If she had known earlier, Eileen might not have disappeared. The Queen wasn't against a political marriage. She herself had married into the family that way and knew the fate of a princess wasn't something she could control. But if she had intervened, the outcome might have been better, instead of her youngest daughter's fate remaining unknown. Later, Catherine couldn't bear to see her mother constantly worried, so she revealed Eileen's whereabouts to her mother to put her mind at ease. Although she only told her mother, she guessed her father already knew Eileen was safe and sound. Transitional Chapter. Chapter 218. Catherine returned to the palace, carrying the letter, and hurried to the Queen's residence. Just as she was about to enter, she saw her mother, Queen Phyllis, being escorted out by several noble women. The Queen had just finished a meeting with the ladies and was now personally seeing them off. Your Highness, the noble women bowed respectfully upon seeing the approaching princess, and Catherine nodded in return. After seeing the guests off, the mother and daughter returned to the Queen's quarters. Queen Phyllis asked curiously, "These past few days, haven't you been spending your days at the military camp? Why are you back so early today?" Catherine pulled out the letter and waved it. "My younger sister has sent word." The previously calm Queen Phyllis immediately wore an expression of worry and excitement, reaching for the letter from Catherine. Catherine preemptively said, "Let me explain first. Eileen is safe and sound there." The Queen's worry lessened somewhat, and she took the letter from her daughter and began to read it carefully. After reading it, she let out a long sigh of relief, and then began to complain. "Really? Why is a young lady always doing men's work? That guy named Gleman is really something. I have a feeling he has ill intentions. Is he planning to do something to Eileen?" Catherine smiled awkwardly, because her mother's first words seemed to be directed not only at her younger sister, but now that she was sharing some of her father's political and military affairs, it was also men's work. "Mother, it's rare that my little sister has found something she enjoys doing, so let her have some fun. My men report that Earl Gleman is a fairly upright lord and shouldn't have any ill intentions towards her." The Queen's face showed a hint of resentment. "She's having a good time, but doesn't she think about how her mother misses her and thinks about her every day? I've raised such a heartless daughter for nothing. Besides, How can princesses serve under a country lord? What kind of decorum is this? If word gets out, people will laugh at us to death. The Northwest Bay has always been considered a barren land by the people of the capital. Although the Gleman family's rank isn't low, they are still inevitably regarded as country lords. Catherine defended her sister. Well, let's just say Eileen went out to observe the people's conditions. After all, she's grown up now, the Queen sighed. We can't let her stay there for long. We need to find a way to bring her back as soon as possible, Catherine said sadly. But as for father, you know Eileen's temper. Her running away from home without a word this time is proof of that. I'm afraid that if father pressures her again when she comes back, my little sister will do something even more extreme. Hearing her eldest daughter's words, Queen Phyllis also began to feel conflicted. She cursed Giles, Veblen, and the others in her heart. If it weren't for these people causing trouble, she wouldn't have been separated from her children, and her husband would have been dragged down with her. Sigh, let her stay there a little longer. You must have someone keep a close eye on her. Yes, I know. Also, don't let your father know this, okay? Catherine didn't voice her suspicion that her father already knew Eileen's whereabouts. After chatting with her mother for a while, she left the living room and headed towards the king's office. On the way, she encountered Earl Morin, who is in charge of the kingdom's intelligence system. The earl looked hurried, as if he had something important to discuss with the king. Lord Morin, is there something urgent? Your Highness, I have something important to report to His Majesty the King. In that case, let's go together. Yes, Earl Morin did not hesitate. After all, Princess Catherine was the king's right-hand woman. During the king's serious illness and coma, she had directly assumed the responsibilities of the monarch. King Rodney's V looked at his eldest daughter, who had a stern face, and felt helpless. Since Eileen ran away from home, his relationship with his family had deteriorated considerably. Fortunately, his eldest daughter, Catherine, didn't let her personal emotions interfere with important matters. He already knew that Eileen had settled down in the Northwest Bay and that Catherine was secretly protecting her sister. If he didn't even know such things, he shouldn't be king. Initially, he wanted to immediately send someone to bring his younger daughter back, but Eileen's fiery temper made him hesitate. Alice, he knew too little about this daughter. It would be terrible if a joyous occasion turned into tragedy. Later, intelligence from the East made his desire for a marriage alliance with the Veblen family gradually fade. The situation was changing. The Veblen family seemed to have decided to side with Giles. If he married his daughter off now, it would be like offering a warm welcome to a cold shoulder. The kingdom's two greatest lords were opposing the royal family. He, as king, was truly a failure. Rodney's V hesitated, wondering if he should bring his younger daughter back, apologize properly, or mend his relationship with his family. But his royal dignity made him resist the idea. Sigh, let's quell the rebellion first. The king gathered his thoughts and asked, Lord Morin, is there anything you wish to say? Earl Morin replied solemnly, Your Majesty, Your Highness, we have some leads regarding the unusual phenomena observed by the rebels at Thorn Fortress. King Rodney's V and Catherine immediately focused their attention. The rebels had launched an attack on Thorn Fortress, and a detailed report of the battle had been sent to the capital. A key description was that the rebel soldiers, clad in impenetrable leather armor and possessing superhuman strength, were like knights against farmers when facing ordinary soldiers. Those remaining in the capital found it unbelievable, and the report, written by Duke Dodge and co-signed by Viscount Klein and Viscount Lester, was confirmed by the three highest-ranking commanders of the fortress to be absolutely true. Klein and Lester had even personally fought these rebel soldiers. Because of these strange enemy soldiers, Thorn Fortress almost fell. Fortunately, Duke Dodge used his last trump card, Hellfire, which halted the rebel offensive. According to the reports, there seemed to be clergy among the rebels, and after some strange prayer ritual, those rebel soldiers turned into what's described in the report. Clergy? Aren't they from the papacy? Although angry, the king and princess weren't surprised. The papacy and the kingdom had a long-standing feud, and it was possible they secretly supported the rebels, but I've never heard of any church ritual that could turn people like that. Catherine was very puzzled. Could those charlatans have really moved the Lord of Light to bestow a miracle? Don't be ridiculous. The three continued discussing in the room for a long time, still completely baffled. Chapter 219 Attending the Banquet. February was fast approaching, and during this period after the new year, Eileen meticulously organized her educational grand plan. After Paul's formal approval, She began implementing the first of her 3 major initiatives as a new official. Previously, the State Council's investment in education had been sporadic. At Aline's strong suggestion, education funding was officially separated as a separate expenditure, placing it alongside the military, industry, and agriculture as one of the 4 major expenditures. Starting in Lakeside Town, the former headmaster of West College, John Morrison, had been sent by Paul to the monastery to assist Father Anderson, leaving the position vacant. Eileen naturally took on this role. She conducted a preliminary examination for the current students, including reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, temporarily dividing them into 3 grades based on their levels. She also reassigned the teachers' duties and established a regular examination system to assess student progress. After a long period of recruitment, West College now had 20 teachers, whose salaries were now managed by Eileen, who had become the head of the education department. Eileen convened a meeting of the teachers and announced that their salaries would henceforth be linked to the exam results of their students. Those with poor grades would have their salaries reduced, while those with good grades would receive increases. This new policy invigorated the atmosphere at the academy. Previously lazy teachers became diligent, and the academy was filled with their exasperated reprimands of their students. In short, the old, laissez-faire teaching style was gone, and the students' good days were over. In addition to daytime education, the West College's literacy night school continued to operate, targeting adults who worked during the day and had nothing to do at night. Eileen stipulated that if any member of the night school passed a basic literacy and arithmetic test, the teacher responsible for teaching that person would receive an additional bonus on top of their regular salary, calculated per student. The more they taught, the more they earned. As a result, some teachers began spontaneously promoting the great importance of education throughout town, and after dinner, they would cooperate with soldiers to hunt down those who were idle at home. On February 3rd, the city of Sint was filled with a festive atmosphere. The streets were adorned with flowers blooming in early spring, and street performers and bards put on a lively show in the city square. Housewives swarmed into shops, laden with sacks, as merchants throughout the city were offering discounts. The entire city was spotless and refreshed, even the beggars had been driven out of the city walls. Tomorrow was the birthday of the city's lord, Duke Ferdinand, and under the auspices of his brother, Viscount Henry, the celebration was to be grand. A procession appeared on the main road outside Sent city gates, led by a rider carrying a flagpole topped with a dragon banner. It was Paul and his entourage, attending the Duke's birthday banquet. Besides Earl Myron Garnard, who was also attending, were the advisor Laddie, the intelligence chief Cecil, the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Army, Bryce, and his adjutant, his former squire when he was a knight. Captain Victor, who had been bedridden for 3 months after a mage broke his ribs last year, commanded 15 elite Imperial Guard soldiers as their escort for the journey. Although only 15 soldiers, each was an incredibly fast and skilled loader. Each was equipped with a newly manufactured flintlock musket, a bayonet, 4 grenades, and a flintlock pistol at their waist. Now, in case of an emergency, the soldiers could simply load and fire without needing to light a matchlock as before. Without the hindrance of the matchlock, they could fire shoulder to shoulder, greatly increasing firepower. Since the last incident, both the Imperial Guard and the Army had intensified their training in emergency situations. If another assassin appeared on the road, they could reload and riddle the target with bullets within a minute. "Are we finally made it?" Paul's voice was weary. After riding for 2 days from Lakeside Town, they had finally arrived in Sent City. To be honest, he really didn't want to come, but he had no choice. His gift was a pair of porcelain vases, about half a person's height, decorated with exquisite patterns. Alda mainly sold small porcelain items, so vases this large were quite precious. He wondered if they would catch the Duke's eye. Of course, the gift had been sent in advance, as porcelain couldn't withstand the jolting on horseback. The reason he brought his female advisor, Laddie, was because she possessed mysterious powers and might be of great help if anything went wrong on the road. Pshaw, better not to jinx it. What could possibly go wrong under the Duke's rule? The group quickly arrived at the city gate, where the guards bowed respectfully. They saw the flags fluttering on the flagpoles, the patterns clearly indicating a noble family's coat of arms. Although they didn't know which family it belonged to, bowing was the right thing to do. Wow! No wonder it's the largest city in the northwest of the kingdom. It's truly unique, Paul exclaimed, admiring the prosperity of Sent City. I heard this city has a permanent population of 50 or 60,000, Elon, like Paul, was visiting Cent for the first time and was also astonished by its size. The easygoing head guard Victor and his men, of course, were quite taken aback. In their minds, Butuaya, the capital of neighboring Bayhorn, was already a large city. Only Cecil, Bryce, and the female advisor Letty remained relatively calm. Cecil and Bryce had visited Cent several times before, while the advisor, from Horn Bay, was more composed. The group strolled towards the Lord's Manor. Although the streets were bustling, people readily made way for the approaching group bearing noble banners. At the Lord's Manor, a well-dressed and impeccably courteous official, no less so than Butler Philip, greeted them. Paul and Mellon handed him invitations. The Gleman family, the Garnard family, the official, wearing a monocle, checked the invitations, counted Paul's group, and gave a few instructions to a servant beside him. Then he bowed slightly to Paul and the others. "My lords, please follow our servants to the official residence prepared for you. We will inform you before the banquet begins. Are we going to have to fend for ourselves for dinner?" Paul's stomach was growling. He had thought he'd be able to feast at the Lord's Manor. After settling into a nearby residence with his servants, Paul eagerly asked Bryce and Cecil, who were familiar with the area, to lead him out to a restaurant. Upon returning, the soldiers who had stayed behind reported to Paul that a nobleman claiming to be Henry Ferdinand had come looking for him. Wasn't that the Duke's brother? They didn't seem to have any connection. Paul turned to Myron. "Do you know him?" Myron shrugged. "Never met him." Cecil whispered in Paul's ear. "Viscount Henry has been quite active since his brother, Duke Ferdinand, fell ill, making connections with other nobles everywhere. Will this banquet turn into some melodramatic drama?" Chapter 220 Attending the Banquet 2. The next day, Paul and Myron, along with Bryce and Victor, attended a banquet at Duke Ferdinand's mansion. The mansion was lavishly decorated, and the greeters from the previous day were busy at the entrance, entertaining the guests. Besides lords from various regions, many prominent figures from Cent City were also present, wealthy merchants, guild leaders, and even people dressed in church attire. Paul stopped a man dressed as a priest and asked, "Excuse me, are you a priest from the city?" The priest, recognizing Paul's attire, knew he was attending the banquet at the Duke's mansion and was likely a lord from out of town, so he dared not be negligent. "Yes, I am a priest from St. Cathedral." "Then do you know Dean Leonard?" "Oh no, do you know Bishop Leonard?" Paul suddenly remembered an old acquaintance in the city. If he remembered correctly, the bishop of the Northwest Bay Diocese was based in Cent City. "What is your name, sir?" Bryce stepped forward and said, "These two are Earl Paul Gleman of Ardla and Earl Myron Garnard of Bayhorn." The priest immediately became respectful. "So you are two earls. I know Bishop Leonard, I hear his teachings in church every day. Is Bishop Leonard here too?" The priest said somewhat awkwardly. "His Holiness the Bishop cannot come, he has been unwell recently." "Wait, Arda? Isn't that where His Holiness the Bishop used to be abbot? Could it be that you are the lord there?" Paul nodded. "Indeed." The priest looked around and whispered to Paul, "Sir Gleman, since you and His Holiness the Bishop are from the same hometown, I will tell you the truth." "Oh?" Paul was greatly surprised. Could there be some hidden story? The priest whispered, "Bishop Leonard isn't very interested in these kinds of occasions, so he made an excuse not to come." "Oh. That's very much in line with his character." Paul and Bryce nodded in unison. More than just uninterested, this old-fashioned abbot had always been averse to lavish and extravagant events. It would be strange if he even showed up for such a grand celebration at the Duke's mansion. "Father, please, Your Excellency, please." Paul and Mellon entered the Duke's mansion and walked for quite a while through the courtyard, which was as large as a plaza, before reaching the main building. Inside, they walked straight down a wide corridor to the main hall. The master of ceremonies at the entrance took the name card from Bryce and announced loudly, "Earl Paul Gleman, present. Earl Mellon Gardner, present." The hall was bustling and noisy, and the arrival of the two didn't attract much attention. However, Viscount Henry, the Duke's brother, who was in charge of hosting the birthday banquet, kept a close eye on every guest's arrival. "Welcome, welcome." Viscount Henry strode towards the door, opening his arms to embrace the two men. "I visited you both last night, but unfortunately you were out. What bad luck. Let me make up for last night's disappointment by hosting you properly today." Paul and Myron quickly exchanged a few pleasantries with him. Henry led the four of them to the arranged seats, where Paul and Myron discovered that several neighbors were already seated, the lords of their neighboring territories. These were the same lords who had refused to come to their aid during last year's pirate invasion. Earl Price Parker, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a kind face, had written in his letter, "During the rebellion, I have a duty to defend my land. How dare I leave my fiefdom? I regret not being able to personally offer my condolences," he rambled on, never mentioning the matter of providing aid. Earl Morley Malkin, probably in his 30s, was resting with his eyes closed, appearing calm and collected. In his letter, he had said that the pirates would leave after taking enough money from the commoners, advising Paul to simply guard the castle, adopting a let them be strong, let them be fierce attitude. Earl Winifred Heller, probably in his 40s, wore glasses and dressed with a scholarly air. In his letter, he wrote, "Tell the pirates, bring your destructive means, we'll let you kill half of our people, and the remaining half will not yield." He was a man with a strange philosophy of non-violent non-cooperation. Besides these three, a group of their vassals sat nearby, all viscounts, barons, and other lords. Paul didn't bother to greet them one by one. "Nephew Paul. Nephew Myron, greetings, earls, long time no see." Upon seeing Paul and Myron arrive, they all stood up to greet them. Even if they weren't particularly close to the Gleman family on a daily basis, they still had to put on a show in public, especially since Paul had Earl Gardner with him. Paul and Myron answered each question with slight embarrassment. They had both inherited their titles due to family misfortunes, their fathers had handled the affairs of these people, and they hadn't interacted much with them and weren't very familiar with them. If their sons had been present, the situation might have been better, but unfortunately, the younger generation was in other halls, and those entering the main hall were the lords and their attendants. "Nephew Paul, you are truly a young hero. You wiped out the pirates in one fell swoop, bringing peace to the entire Northwest Bay. Nephew Myron, you were equally composed in the face of your vassals' rebellion, swiftly eliminating those villains." Price Parker suddenly praised Paul and Myron. His territory was also near the sea, and he had benefited greatly from the Arden Navy's elimination of the pirates. Myron smiled slightly, a little shyly saying, "Not at all, it was Paul who helped me quell the rebellion." Paul said meaningfully, "Yes, it was all thanks to your encouragement and guidance that I was able to eliminate the pirates." The others, whether they understood or not, showed no embarrassment whatsoever. Morley Malkin suddenly smiled and said, "You two have been doing quite well with your business lately." Hearing Malkin's words, the others perked up their ears and all looked at Paul. Several new commodities that had become wildly popular in the market over the past 6 months, porcelain, paper, and canned goods, were all produced in Arda and Bardeen, and according to their investigations, the source was the Gleman family. Based on his past life's principle of not flaunting wealth, Paul quickly waved his hand, "Not at all. Just making a little money." "Making a little money? Earl Gleman, you can't say that. You must be counting money until your hands are sore every day." They knew how popular those goods were. Not only in the Northwest Bay, but caravans frequently passed through their territory between Arda and Bardeen. There weren't so many in the first half of last year, but the number gradually increased in the second half, even with their high tariffs. This meant that even after paying hefty tariffs, the profits from selling these goods were still very high. How could this not make people envious? Chapter 221 Attending the Banquet 3. Earl Gleman, Earl Garnered, how are all those things of yours made? I'm willing to pay a hefty price for the technology. Finally, someone asked. Me too. My family has some savings. The price we offer will definitely satisfy you. Once the first person asked, another followed. They had also sent people to Alda to inquire about the technology, but Alda was extremely strict in managing its factories and workers. The production process was divided into several parts, with each worker responsible for only a small section. Very few people had the opportunity to see the whole picture. Those qualified were all paid high salaries, and they and their families lived in specially protected areas. So far, they had only gleaned a little information, such as papermaking seemingly being related to wood, and porcelain appearing to be made from clay. Cecil, the intelligence chief, while not as all-powerful as those in other transmigration novels, was still competent at keeping his own secrets. However, to be fair, the surrounding lords didn't have any significant underground forces. They were all just weaklings fighting each other on the secret front. Myron, at a loss, stared blankly at Paul, waiting for him to make a decision. Gentlemen, Paul hesitated, still undecided about whether to open up the technology to the outside world. Since the successful blast furnace iron making, he had pursued higher goals and had become less concerned with industries like papermaking and canning. He didn't want to spend too much to keep their secrets. As he had previously thought, these things would eventually spread. However, even with Arda and Barden, they hadn't yet established absolute dominance over the surrounding territories. In this chaotic world, might makes right, they needed to accumulate some capital for self-defense first. Gentlemen, we have a patent system where we live. Granting others access to these technologies requires authorization from the inventor. Patents? Aren't you the Lord of Arda? You have to be so deferential. Well, there are rules to follow. It's not convenient to discuss this here. If you're interested, you're welcome to visit Lake Town. We can sit down and talk it over. Seeing that Paul hadn't completely ruled out the possibility, the lords knew there was a good chance of success. Besides, this place was too crowded and not suitable for business. It was better to keep good things to a select few. A few neighbors could share. All right, we'll talk about it back home. Paul, my little brother, Melon, let's drink. Let's drink. The smiling crowd shifted to another topic, engaging in lively conversation. Duke Ferdinand, present. Earl of Kent, present. A loud announcement came from outside, several times louder than the others. The main guest of this birthday banquet had finally arrived. The entire hall fell silent as everyone calmly awaited the arrival of the most powerful vassal in the northwest of the kingdom. A frail figure, supported by a servant, slowly entered. The Duke of Ferdinand now looked thin and weak, barely able to walk. Tisk tisk, His Excellency the Duke seems to be really failing. I can't believe it. When I visited him half a year ago, he was radiant and in excellent health. Oh, and he had just taken a new concubine then. Perhaps he's fallen ill with some kind of sudden ailment. Paul overheard the whispers around him. As soon as the Duke entered, his brother, Viscount Henry, rushed to greet him. My brother, we've been waiting for you. Today you're the star of the show. Happy birthday, the Duke responded weakly, not even glancing at the crowd in the hall, and walked straight to the head seat without a word. Henry dismissed the servants and personally supported him. Behind the Duke were two people, two. One was Earl Maltz Kent, and the other was a young boy, presumably Earl Kent's page. No one in the hall questioned why the Earl of Kent had appeared with the Duke. Everyone knew that Maltz Kent was Duke Ferdinand's most trusted confidant. Maltz Kent controlled his pace, always following behind Duke Ferdinand. The Duke finally reached his seat, turned around, and plopped down. The Earl of Kent and his page also sat down near the Duke, while Henry sat on the other side of the Duke. Only then did Duke Ferdinand raise his head and look around the hall. Seeing so many people in the hall, all looking up at him, his face flushed. The thrill of power restored some of the Duke's spirits. He extended his slightly trembling arm, and a servant standing beside him immediately filled a wine glass on the table. The Duke raised the glass and thrust it forward. Gentlemen, thank you for coming to my birthday banquet. Today, let's drink until we drop. Happy birthday, Your Grace. Everyone in the hall raised their glasses towards Duke Ferdinand, chanting in unison their birthday wishes. Very well, the Duke finally smiled. While everyone looked at Duke Ferdinand, Paul was observing Earl Kent, the man who had sent envoys to Lake Town to extort him last year. Maltz Kent seemed to sense something, turning his head to meet Paul's gaze. He smiled slightly at Paul. Paul, however, suddenly felt a chill, as if he had been startled by a swarm of bats while exploring a dark cave. Duke Ferdinand, seated at the head of the table, mustered his strength and announced the start of the banquet. Immediately, a group of servants entered and filled the tables before everyone with food, removing the nearly empty wine barrels and replacing them with new ones. Please, you two. After a few polite exchanges, the guests began to enjoy the food and wine. Besides the abundant food, the banquet also featured various entertainment, with different performers taking turns to perform. Dwarfs and clowns made people laugh heartily, the bard's songs were enchanting, and the juggler's acrobatics were thrilling. Oh dear, I'm sure I'll gain 10 pounds when I get back this time. Paul, knife in one hand and fork in the other, sweating profusely as he worked on the roast suckling pig in front of him, occasionally clinking glasses with Melon, Bryce, and others beside him. Gentlemen, a voice suddenly came from the other side, though not loud, it silenced the hall once more. His Excellency the Duke spoke again, and Paul reluctantly put down his knife and fork, adopting a listening posture. As you can see, my body is becoming increasingly useless, so, the Duke's voice lowered again, as if he was having difficulty speaking. So, after saying so countless times, he seemed to have made a final decision, and with a burst of strength, he said loudly, "While everyone is here, I will announce the heir." This statement caused a stir among the entire hall. Chapter 222 Banquet Turmoil. The Duke of Ferdinand is about to announce his heir? Everyone was quite surprised, but upon reflection, it did seem timely. Normally, a nobleman's heir is his eldest son, and unless something unexpected happens, there's no need for a public announcement. But the Duke is different, he has no sons, and his health seems to be failing. Therefore, it's reasonable for him to announce his heir today. Who will be the lucky one? The most likely candidate is Viscount Henry. After all, he is the Duke's eldest brother. Viscount Henry has recently settled in Sent, attending to the Duke's every need and frequently cultivating relationships with various lords, seemingly determined to obtain the ducal title. However, the position isn't entirely certain. In fact, Viscount Henry and the Duke aren't exactly brothers, as they share a different mother. When His Excellency was merely the heir to the dukedom, the title would have rightfully belonged to him. However, Viscount Henry had always been a somewhat unruly man. After the death of the previous Duke Ferdinand, the two brothers had some unpleasant experiences. Despite the many twists and turns, His Excellency still inherited the title. Whether out of consideration for his brother or to project an image of magnanimity, Duke Ferdinand did not pursue the matter with his brother and even granted him a viscountcy. Viscount Henry became more obedient afterward, but recently his ambitions had clearly resurfaced. But who knew if Duke Ferdinand still cared about what he had done in the past? The title might even fall into the hands of a collateral branch of the family. Everyone pondered this, holding their breath and quietly awaiting the Duke's next words. Whoever the Duke chose as his heir, they would have to curry favor with him after the banquet. No, they would have to go and toast him later. At this moment, only Malps Kent remained remarkably calm, slowly sipping his wine with a cold smile playing on his lips. The wine, usually bland and tasteless, suddenly tasted incredibly delicious today. The Earl's page, however, stared intently at the Duke in the main seat. I decided, who was it? Was it Viscount Henry? Most people guessed it was. The heir is. Henry himself widened his eyes, his heart pounding with anxiety, waiting for his brother to say his name. In his mind, he was almost certainly, no, 100% certain. After all, he had been cautious and meticulous for so many years, slowly mending the relationship between the brothers, and judging from his elder brother's attitude towards him, he hadn't shown any resentment towards the past. As long as his elder brother didn't mind, then traditionally, he was definitely his heir. Malps Kent. In an instant, all sound in the hall ceased, even the sound of breathing. After a few seconds of silence, a collective gasp erupted from the guests. The Earl of Kent is heir to the Duke. Unbelievable. The Earl of Kent. Whispers arose, everyone incredulous at the Duke's choice. Especially the members of several collateral branches of the Ferdinand family, their faces blank with disbelief. Even if the Duke's throne wasn't theirs, why throw it so far away? Indeed, the Kent and Ferdinand families shared some blood ties, practically the same lineage, but which generation was that? Viscount Henry? Viscount Henry. Those around Henry noticed the Viscount's motionless stance and quickly patted him on the back. Alice. The one most shocked was probably the Duke's younger brother. Everyone felt deep sympathy for him. Henry finally came to his senses, but his expression remained blank. He turned to those around him and asked, "What did my brother just say?" Although the Duke of Ferdinand's words were fragmented, they were clear enough for everyone in the hall to hear. Viscount Henry clearly hadn't missed them, but rather couldn't believe his brother's words. "Oh, Your Excellency, your brother," the man being asked looked embarrassed. How was he supposed to answer? "My brother, what did he just say?" the Viscount asked again, his tone now harsh, veins bulging on his temples. The man was startled and quickly replied, The Duke said he's decided to make Earl Malps Kent his heir." No, a loud shout echoed through the hall, drawing the attention of all the guests. "No. This isn't true." Viscount Henry, his face contorted with madness, couldn't accept the cruel reality after hearing it from someone else. He shoved the table in front of him, spilling food and drink everywhere. Henry rushed to the head of the table, grabbing his brother's shoulders and shaking him violently. "Brother! My brother! Tell me this isn't true. How could you choose someone outside your family as your heir?" Seeing his brother looking dazed, he shook him even more vigorously. "Say something. Say something." Following Henry's lead, the other members of the Ferdinand family gathered around, raising their own questions. "Yes, Your Grace," Even if you don't choose Viscount Henry, you can't pass it on to an outsider. Take back your rash order. You're the patriarch. You must consider the family's interests. You need to think carefully. This title was passed down from our ancestors. The guests in the room were at a loss, unsure whether to get involved in this family feud. Enough, Duke Ferdinand suddenly erupted, seemingly possessing a strength he didn't know he possessed, shoving his brother aside. Viscount Henry stumbled backward, tripping over the table behind him, scattering dishes and food everywhere. The Duke pointed at him, his face contorted with rage, and said, "You think I've forgotten all the filth you did back then? You think you can wipe the slate clean? HMPH, dream on." Viscount Henry couldn't speak. A shard of broken glass pierced his hand, the sharp pain jolting him back to reality. All these years, he hadn't expected his brother to still not have forgiven him. Was all that brotherly affection just a facade? This was the second blow he'd suffered today. Duke Ferdinand suddenly regained his former majesty and imposing presence, shouting, "Guards!" Footsteps sounded, and a large group of fully armed guards rushed into the hall. "Lock this bastard in the dungeon. Lock him in, yes, lock him in the deepest, darkest cell, yes, sir." Viscount Henry's face was ashen. He didn't resist, letting the guards drag him out. Duke Ferdinand spat at him, HMPH. Ungrateful and delusional, go to hell. Then, he looked around, giving a particular look to the few clansmen who had gathered around him. "Now, does anyone have any objections?" Chapter 223 Banquet Turmoil 2. "Now, does anyone have any objections?" the Duke said with a grim expression. Several members of the Ferdinand family immediately retreated, meekly agreeing. The hall quickly fell silent. Anyone who got involved in such matters was doomed. After a few seconds, a man stepped forward, Count Maltzkend, the Duke's designated heir. "Your Grace, I am of meager talent and truly unworthy of the title," Maltzkend said earnestly. "Please find another suitable candidate." "No," the Duke waved his hand. "I have decided. You will inherit the Duke's title, as long as your Kent family restores the Ferdinand surname." Maltzkend seemed hesitant. The Duke even said in a slightly pleading voice, "The current members of the Ferdinand family are all incompetent. I fear that after I receive the Lord's blessing, the family will decline." The few members of the Duke's family felt deeply ashamed. "What, Maltzkend? Our two families share a common ancestor. Aren't you willing to do your part for the glory of our ancestors?" Maltzkend was still hesitating. His appearance made Paul anxious. Damn, this guy is hesitating for no reason. He's obviously just putting on an act. Although he had a grudge against Maltzkend, Paul was envious of his good fortune. Why didn't such good things happen to him? "Alright," Maltzkend seemed to have made up his mind. "Since your Grace doesn't mind, then I will presumptuously accept your arrangement. Your Grace, I will definitely develop and strengthen the Ferdinand family." Hearing Earl Kent say this, the Duke smiled faintly, only saying repeatedly, "Good. Good. Good." He seemed to immediately return to his previous frail appearance. Trembling as he raised his cup, the servants had quickly cleaned up the mess on the floor and rearranged the food and wine. "Gentlemen, let's celebrate the birth of a new heir to the Ferdinand family." The hall suddenly became lively again, with guests clinking glasses and exchanging toasts, no longer remembering Viscount Henry who had just been dragged out. Everyone took turns currying favor with the future Duke Ferdinand. To build rapport, Paul and Myron also approached Maltzkend with their glasses. "Earl Kent, congratulations." Paul, suppressing the urge to spit in his face, congratulated the Earl of Kent, though his heart was filled with old grudges and jealousy. "Ha ha ha. Of course, I'll have to rely on my two neighbors for help in the future." Maltzkend laughed heartily, then downed a large glass of wine with Paul and Myron, as if nothing unpleasant had ever happened between them. After the formalities, Paul returned to his seat and began to eat and drink by himself. The Earl of Kent watched Paul's departing figure with a smug expression. The page beside him remained silent. After the banquet, the Duke announced a tournament, allowing nobles and knights confident in their skills to showcase their prowess on the field. "Are you interested in participating?" Paul asked Bryce and Victor. Bryce chuckled, "Haha, forget it. Earl, unofficial knights like us aren't qualified to compete. If Lord Schroeder were here, we could participate." Paul shrugged. "Well, I'm not interested in watching either." "Let's go back." Myron, however, seemed quite interested. "Even if we don't participate, watching is always good." Victor, standing beside him, shared the same expression. Alright, Myron, you and Victor go to the arena to watch the fun. Bryce and I will visit Bishop Leonard. So the four parted ways, with Paul led by Bryce towards the cathedral. After riding for nearly half an hour, they arrived at the cathedral in Sense City, the bishop's residence of the Northwest Bay Church. Bishop Leonard received them in the reception room. His Excellency the Bishop didn't appear ill, just as the priest had said. He was using the excuse of not attending Duke Ferdinand's banquet. Old Abbot, long time no see. Count, long time no see. Leonard still wore his usual stern expression, but a rare smile appeared on his face upon seeing an old friend. They chatted casually, and Paul recounted recent events in Arda, making Leonard's smile grow wider. They talked about the banquet, and Leonard again vehemently criticized the nobility's extravagance and debauchery. He spoke so frankly because he knew Paul's personal life was relatively simple, compared to other nobles. Speaking of which, there was an incident at the banquet. What incident? Duke Ferdinand announced his heir. Finally, this day has come. It seems His Excellency has given up on having a son. Is it his younger brother, Viscount Henry? Duke Ferdinand's efforts to have a son were widely known. No, you're mistaken. The heir is that fellow Maltzkant. Hearing Paul say this, Bishop Leonard's expression turned serious. Maltzkant? His family does have some connection to the Ferdinand family, but there's no reason for the Duke to choose such a collateral branch, is there? I remember that's right, he threatened Arda last year, though I don't know what got into him later. He let us go. Sigh. The old abbot sighed, his expression growing increasingly grave. I'm afraid trouble will ensue. Maltzkant is not someone to be trifled with. Your Excellency, you must be careful. Now that he holds the Duke's power, there's even less that can restrain him in this northwestern land. Although Leonard now held the high position of bishop, the old abbot was rather principled. In his creed, the church should not interfere in the affairs of secular lords unless it involved church matters. Therefore, all he could do was verbally remind Paul in a private capacity. Thank you for the reminder, but Arda is no longer a pushover, Paul said confidently. Leonard agreed. Through correspondence with his student, Father Anderson, he knew that Arda was developing rapidly and was no longer the impoverished and weak earldom it once was. He still felt a strong attachment to the place where he was born and had lived and worked for so long, and the changes over the past year made him very happy, and he also felt a sense of respect for Paul, who had facilitated these changes. After spending nearly 2 hours in the church, Paul and Bryce bid farewell to Bishop Leonard and returned to their lodgings. Due to work commitments, updates may be unstable recently. Please forgive me, dear readers. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 224 The Dungeon. Back at his lodgings, Paul recounted the events of the banquet to Cecil and the female advisor who remained behind. Cecil rubbed his chin and clicked his tongue. Now the drunkards in the taverns will have something new to talk about. Your Excellency, I guarantee that within 3 days, countless versions of the story about a succession to the dukedom will be circulating in the streets. That exaggerated, people always love stories that reek of conspiracy. Even if there's no real conspiracy or complicated details, people will embellish them. Cecil, we need to strengthen our intelligence gathering on the Kent family. He was hostile to us before, and even if he doesn't cause us trouble in the future, we still need to be wary. Once Maltzkant becomes duke, his power will be even greater. Your Excellency, I know that, Paul said. If there's nothing else, let's go back tomorrow, eh? Your Excellency, there's a martial arts tournament in Sint that will last for several days. Aren't you going to stay and watch? I have absolutely no interest in those things. Compared to the martial arts tournament, I'm more concerned about how the ironworks expansion is going. The female advisor strongly supported Paul's decision. Perhaps because of her secretive identity, Laddie felt insecure ever since leaving Alda. Before dinner, Myron and Victor returned. It's strange, Count Garnard said, spreading his hands, somewhat bewildered. At first I was quite excited, but during one of the matches, I suddenly thought about how those swaggering knights on the field could be brought down by an ordinary person with a musket. Suddenly, the tournament seemed utterly pointless. All right, Myron, let's go back together tomorrow. Everyone reached a consensus. The dungeon within the Duke's mansion was a dark, damp, and chilly place. This was especially true in the deepest part of the dungeon, where the air was foul and filled with a musty smell. Only a few torches stuck in the walls provided a sliver of light and warmth. Over the years, countless criminals and enemies of the Ferdinand family had been imprisoned here, and many had spent their final, tragic moments here. Among them were many who had died unjustly. If one listened carefully in the dungeon, one could hear low, muttering murmurs, as if the wronged spirits of the dead were wandering and lamenting their misfortunes. In this place so quiet it could induce auditory hallucinations, footsteps suddenly sounded. A guard led an old man to the door of the deepest cell. Behind the iron bars lay a figure. Hearing someone arrive, he immediately sat up and looked outside. The guard glanced at the figure in the cell and bowed. "Viscount, your steward has come to see you." The man in prison here was Viscount Henry, who had angered his brother, Duke Ferdinand, over the succession to the title. Although he had been imprisoned in the deepest part of the dungeon on the Duke's orders, the guards dared not treat him as an ordinary prisoner. Henry, after all, was a member of the Ferdinand family, a Viscount, and the Duke's younger brother. Although the Duke was currently furious and had his brother imprisoned, they didn't treat Henry lightly. If they were disrespectful to him, and the brothers later reconciled, these small fry, would definitely be in big trouble. "Butler, you've finally arrived." Henry inside had a mournful face, as if he were enduring a great injustice and resentment. "What? How could my brother treat me like this? I'm his own brother." As he spoke, Henry burst into tears. The butler sighed and comforted him. "Viscount, please don't be like this. I've already pleaded with the Duke for you. I'm sure he won't really make things difficult for you." "Ah. You've already seen my brother? What did he say?" "The Duke said you'll be imprisoned for another 2 days." Before the butler could finish speaking, a series of hurried footsteps sounded outside. A man dressed as an officer, his face ashen, stormed in, followed by 2 other guards watching the cells. The guard who had led the steward in earlier sensed something was wrong when he saw the expressions on the faces of the officer's 2 companions. Sure enough, the officer came up to him and slapped him hard across the face. A red 5-finger mark appeared on the guard's face. He covered his face, head bowed, awaiting his superior's reprimand. The guards weren't very familiar with their superior. The previous officer in charge of the dungeon had been transferred a few days ago, and this new one had taken his place. Rumors circulated that he had a close relationship with the Earl of Kent. The officer roared at the guards, "I'm just going out to take a piss, and you're all causing me trouble. Bringing a stranger into the cell without my permission." The guard looked aggrieved. "But, sir, he's Viscount Henry's butler." The officer glared and shouted, "That's still not allowed. Everyone needs my permission to enter." Although he was yelling at the guards, it was clear he wasn't just addressing them. The old butler, standing nearby, quickly apologized. "My lord, please forgive me, I don't know the rules here." Viscount Henry, locked up, looked bewildered, seemingly frightened. The officer turned to the butler. "Butler, I'm not an unreasonable person, but rules are rules. You see." He glanced at the wooden box the butler was carrying. The butler immediately presented the wooden box with both hands. "Oh, this is food for His Excellency the Viscount. I'm afraid he won't be used to the prison food. Please check it, then please forgive my intrusion." The officer didn't waste any words and immediately opened the box, carefully checking each item. The box was indeed full of food. He returned the box to the butler. "After delivering the goods, say a few words and leave. There are time restrictions for prison visits, and His Excellency the Viscount is no exception." "Yes, yes. I'll leave immediately." The butler readily agreed, handing the box to Viscount Henry on the other side of the iron bars, giving him a few words of advice about taking care of himself, and then got up to take his leave. Before leaving, he took out a bag and stuffed it into the hand of the officer who had been watching them the whole time. "Sir, please take good care of Viscount Henry in the future." The officer tossed the bag, making a clear, pleasant sound, and a few smiles appeared on his usually tense face. Of course. I will certainly take good care of His Excellency the Duke's brother." Then he led the butler outside. From behind came Viscount Henry's voice, trembling with tears. "Butler, you must go and persuade my brother again. He was cared for by you when he was little. He'll definitely listen to you." The footsteps grew fainter and fainter until they disappeared completely. Viscount Henry opened the wooden box, but instead of eating immediately, he took out the bread pieces and broke them open one by one. After breaking open the 3rd piece, he found a small paper roll embedded inside. As expected, the Viscount muttered to himself as he took out the paper roll from the bread. His previous timid demeanor had vanished. HMPH, my dear brother. I thought you'd forgotten what this cell in the deepest part was for. Now it seems you still remember. Chapter 225 Printing Planned. This is a room in a workshop on the southern shore of Lake Vis. Inside are rows of strange machines, and stacks of papers of various sizes. Workers are busy laying the papers on the machines, and after a series of operations, dense text appears on the paper. In mid-February, after overcoming technical difficulties such as ink and metal type, Arden's first printing plant, arguably the world's first printing plant, was finally established. Sam, a voice filled with anger rang out from a corner of the workshop. Yes, master, I'm coming. A typesetter hurriedly ran towards the workshop foreman, sensing impending doom from the foreman's tone. Sam was a refugee who had arrived in Arda before the new year. He knew a few words and had originally wanted to take the civil service exam for the state council, but failed. Left with no other choice, he took a factory job, secretly resolving to use his spare time to learn to read and write again for the next exam. Arda wasn't like other places. You didn't need connections with a lord's family. As long as you passed the exam, you could become a high-ranking official in the eyes of the common people. After careful comparison, Sam found that those jobs requiring literacy paid significantly more. So he became a typesetter at a printing factory. At first, he didn't know what a typesetter did, let alone what a printing factory was. Only after entering the factory and experiencing the work environment did he discover how amazing this place was. In his previous understanding, books were copied word by scribes, but this place called the printing factory had a magical machine that could mass-produce books in an astonishing way. Sam cherished this job. Becoming a typesetter was a great opportunity for training, and he could continue to learn while working. However, at this stage, because of his limited literacy, he was only assigned some simple tasks, such as typeset some literacy booklets compiled by the Department of Education for Literacy Education. He was now filled with anxiety, wondering if he had made another mistake that had angered the workshop foreman so much. You lowly, stupid out-of-towner, a complete scatterbrain. A string of profanities poured from the foreman's mouth as he pointed to the printed plates already laid out on the table, Sam's previous work. Idiot. Open your eyes and look carefully. Aren't the letters in this word in the wrong order? Sure enough, his previous work had gone wrong. Sam looked tremblingly at the word the foreman was pointing to and realized that the letters were indeed out of order. Mr. Foreman, it's my fault. I'm sorry. I swear I'll be careful next time. He hung his head, apologizing repeatedly, regretting not having checked it more thoroughly. If I remember correctly, this isn't the first time you've made this mistake. If I hadn't decided to check it again, another batch of books would have been ruined. The foreman waved his fist, as if he were about to strike, making Sam tremble with fear. But even if the foreman really wanted to hide him, he dared not fight back. Do I need to remind you? You're still on probation. As the workshop foreman, I have the authority to fire you immediately. Sir, please give me another chance. I swear I'll never make the same mistake again. Sam's voice trembled with fear, terrified of losing his job. Seeing that his intimidation had worked, the workshop foreman was secretly pleased. He didn't actually want to fire Sam. Hiring a literate worker was quite difficult, even this half-baked one. However, he still had to be firm. He couldn't tolerate typesetting errors in the books printed in his workshop. Such a phenomenon had to be eliminated. He threatened fiercely, "Fine, I'll give you one more chance, but I swear, if you make such a stupid mistake again, I'll kick you out of my workshop. If other workshops don't want you either, you can just pack your bags and leave." Yes, sir, thank you so much. I promise I'll never do it again. Sam nodded and bowed repeatedly, thankful he hadn't been fired. Half of this month's salary will be deducted. Mr. Foreman. Yes, whatever you say. Sam felt a pang of heartache. The probationary salary was already low, and now half of it was going to be deducted. My goodness. There are so many books here. A clear, melodious voice, like a lark's, rang out from the doorway, drawing everyone in the workshop to look towards it. Oh, how beautiful. Sam also looked towards the door and saw the printing factory manager walking in with two women. The one in front had striking blonde hair, her face full of liveliness and surprise. The one behind had green hair, her expression more composed than the first, and she was also observing the layout of the workshop with curiosity in her eyes. Both girls were beautiful and had an extraordinary air about them. The workers stopped what they were doing and stared at them, mesmerized. The factory manager, standing beside the two girls, adopted a stern expression and roared at the workers, "What are you all doing? Get back to work." The workshop foreman immediately gave Sam a hard kick in the backside. "Get your layout right, and don't forget what I just said." Sam rubbed his backside and focused intently on his work, determined not to make another mistake. The workshop foreman remembered that the factory manager had mentioned two important figures from the state council were coming today. Judging from the factory manager's polite demeanor when he entered, these were probably the two. Unexpectedly, they were two young girls, but their attire clearly indicated they weren't from ordinary families. After yelling at the workers, the factory manager put on a smile and introduced the two girls beside him. "Supervisor Diash, Advisor Sisha, this is our largest printing workshop. We planned to print the samples you sent here." It turned out to be the newly appointed acting director of the education department. This matter had caused quite a stir because the acting director was a woman. A woman in office. This was truly unprecedented, and many people thought the Lord's move was absurd. The workshop foreman quickly went over. "Godfather, I've never seen a book be manufactured so easily." Eileen looked incredulous. Although she had heard Paul talk about his ideas for printing presses, she was still amazed after witnessing the book printing process firsthand. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.